Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 576. Asher Greyjoy. Then Viserys turned around and looked at the girl in black and grey leather armor following behind him. His lavender eyes were calm and his voice was calm. "Why don't you leave?" Viserys' words just now scared away the villagers. His eyes were also full of pressure. Even the girl who conquered the sea couldn't help but shrink her neck slightly. But her personality made her a strong character, arrogant, and dared to challenge traditions. So she snorted and said, "You haven't answered my question yet." However, this was already an obvious question, and Viserys didn't need to answer it. "Are you from the Iron Islands?" Clang. Viserys put the dusk in his hand back into the scabbard, and then asked. The girl looked at his magic weapon, that could cut gold and jade, and cut iron like mud, and her eyes showed envy. As a warrior, who wouldn't like such a weapon? "Is this the famous dusk?" "Yes." The girl didn't hide it when she heard Viserys' question, but nodded and admitted it openly. "How do you know?" Accent. "Only people from the Iron Islands speak in a rough and hoarse voice, as if they have a mouthful of spit in their mouths." "You." The girl was choked for a moment, and the smile on her face disappeared. She looked annoyed and stared at him fiercely. "This is related to the climate of the Iron Islands. The island is surrounded by the sea, the air is humid, and the sea breeze is fierce. The skin on the cheeks of people from the Iron Islands is a little rough, red, and dry, and their throats are also affected." If someone else said such a thing, she would have chopped him off with a knife, but the identity of the person who was speaking opposite her made her hold her anger in her stomach. She gripped the hilt of the knife in her hand and did not respond to Viserys' words, then raised her head and looked at the dark night sky. The moon was hanging high in the sky, and the fire in the abandoned castle was bright. "You are my savior, Viserys. If you hadn't happened to pass by, I might have been defiled by these scums and cut my throat with a knife." She directly admitted that she had made the worst plan. Not long ago, she led several men out of the mountains to plunder food, but she was attacked by the blood troop. The other side was outnumbered, and the men who followed her were all killed. She was the only one who survived, and she was saved because the other side wanted to defile her. But this world is too cruel for the girl. She knows very well that, even if she sacrifices her body to cater to these villains, the final result is nothing more than death, and her throat will be cut. In terms of plundering, her tribe is an expert, and she is too experienced, so she has already made the worst plan. But she didn't expect that she was not destined to die. The king of the Seven Kingdoms didn't sit on his iron throne, but happened to pass by on a dragon, and saved her by the way. But she didn't plan to leave just like that, but chose to stay with Viserys, and then reminded him in a serious voice. "You shouldn't let your black dragon leave. Who knows if those damn guys will come back. I'm actually doing this for your own good, because you saved me. Otherwise, no matter if you are a fucking king or not, I would not stay to help you." The dragon suddenly flapped its wings and flew away. She didn't understand what Viserys said to the dragon, so she had no way to stop it, but she was afraid that the villains of the blood troop would come back. It would be very dangerous for Viserys to be alone here, so the girl also stayed here and reminded him. "Who are you?" Hearing the girl say this, the silver-haired young man turned his head slightly and asked. He didn't care too much about this girl at first. He saw the calluses on her hands. Although most girls would not touch a knife, this cruel world forced some girls to take up weapons to protect themselves. However, the next few words made Viserys suddenly interested in her identity. "Asher. Asher Greyjoy. I'm the daughter of the sea monster, the daughter of Balon Greyjoy." The girl answered without hesitation when she heard Viserys' question. Her carefree personality even made her look like a man. "Oh, you are Balon's daughter? Are you still alive?" Viserys raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He had heard of this name and had some impression of this woman. She would be an outstanding female captain and fleet commander in the future. He thought she had died on the Iron Islands, but he didn't expect that she actually survived and had been hiding in the mountains of the Westerly. "Where is your father?" "Dead." Asha Greyjoy didn't hide anything when she heard Viserys' question. She shrugged her shoulders slightly and spoke. In fact, the relationship between Asha and her father Balon was not very close, mainly due to Balon's strict discipline. Since his only remaining son was taken away, he placed all his hopes on Asha and trained her as a man. This created the captain of the Black Wind later, but the corresponding price was the relationship between the two. Then Asha told what happened after the fall of the Iron Islands. The fall of the Iron Islands has always been an unknown secret. No one knows how the Iron Islands were breached by the Army of the Dead. The Army of the Dead suddenly appeared behind the coalition forces, almost annihilating the coalition forces, and King Robert was shot and fell off his horse. If Viserys had not repelled the Night King by himself, the consequences of the coalition forces being attacked from both sides would be disastrous, and even the whole world would be in danger. However, at this moment, screams suddenly sounded outside the twins, and several villagers who escaped were killed by members of the warriors. Here we come. Viserys slightly tilted his eyes. The mercenaries of the Blood Troop immediately became interested after discovering that the dragon had left, and even the grey-haired Maester could not raise any objection. So this group of criminals from all over the world came back to kill again, wanting to kidnap Viserys and demand a huge ransom from the Iron Throne. When Asha heard the voices from the outside world, her face suddenly changed. I knew it. They are back. Run. Can you call back your dragon? However, Viserys, who was sitting in a clean place, seemed very calm. He shook his head. I didn't want to go to the trouble of killing them. But if they dare to come back, they will die. Then he threw the firewood in his hand into the blazing fire, and at this moment, another shrill scream rang out. Ah, this time it was so close that one could even see the hideous expressions on the faces of the murderers. Damn it. The blazing flames distorted her vision, and Asha pulled out the scimitar at her waist. However, as soon as she pulled out the scimitar, Asha froze in place, not knowing if she was dazzled. She watched the scream just now, and it turned out that a mercenary from the Blood Troop pierced his companion's chest with a sword, and his face was also cruel and hideous. Go to hell. What the hell are you doing? The other mercenaries of the Blood Troop were all horrified, but then they all fell into a fight, their eyes bloodshot, blood and flesh flying everywhere, right in front of Viserys. The silver-haired young man still sat steadily in front of the campfire, throwing a piece of firewood, and the blazing flames distorted his figure. This. Asha Greyjoy's eyes widened, and her body couldn't help but tremble slightly. Chapter 577 Cobbin. The raid of the bloody troop started quickly and ended quickly. The girl with short black hair held a scimitar in her hand, and was a little stunned. She watched the vicious gangsters with ferocious faces, fighting each other as if they had a deep hatred, until everyone fell down. Except for the last grey-robed Maester who was cautious by nature, and had difficulty walking. He was the last one to fall. The rest of the bloody troop members all fought to death, and no one was spared. The grey-robed Maester who had escaped by chance had never seen such a scene before, and his legs became weak, and he fell to the ground. There was still blood splattered on his face. He trembled and leaned against the wall, looking at the silver-haired young man sitting by the campfire with horror. His eyes were like looking at a demon, and Asha Greyjoy was the same. She looked at Viserys with some horror. No one present was stupid. Although the members of the bloody troop were all crazy, they were not stupid. There was no reason for them to suddenly kill each other. Then there is only one possibility, that is, it came from this mysterious young dragon master. There are rumors that the king has mastered magic, but now it seems that it is not groundless. At this time, the roar of the black dragon came from the sky outside the twins. He had just taken a bath in the Green Fork River outside the city, and caught some fish and beasts to satisfy his hunger. Boom. Then Balerion whistled his wings, and fell from the sky, landing on the ground, raising a rolling wave of air. It saw the corpses all over the ground, and white mist sprayed out of its nostrils. Then it tilted its head slightly with doubts in its eyes, and turned its head to look at Viserys. It seemed that something happened here after it left. The Maester in a grey robe, whose legs were limp on the ground, saw the giant dragon falling from the sky. He was so scared that his soul was scared. He immediately didn't care about his embarrassment, and he rolled and crawled in fear to the corner of the wall. The rolling air drenched him into dust. The silver-haired young man sitting on the other side seemed very calm from beginning to end. He didn't even need to take action himself to deal with this group of bastards. He used the stick in his hand to pick up the firewood in the campfire to make the flames burn more fully, and then threw the stick aside, stood up and walked towards the Meester, wanting to ask him a few questions. In fact, this poor grey-robed Meester did not escape by luck, but Viserys deliberately wanted to leave a survivor. He didn't know who this group of people were yet, and just killed them. Originally, Viserys didn't want to go to great lengths to hunt down this group of robbers. This was the business of the local nobles around, but he didn't expect them to seek death. However, Viserys stood up and walked towards the Meester, frightening him so much that his face became even paler, and he quickly kowtowed on the ground and begged for mercy. "Your Majesty, spare my life. Your Majesty, spare my life." The Meester knelt on the ground and saw the pair of deerskin boots staying in front of him. His body couldn't help but tremble, and then at this time he heard a calm voice from above his head. "What's your name?" Viserys asked. "Qyburn." "Your Majesty, my name is Qyburn." The grey-robed Meester kowtowed again, blood even flowing from his forehead, and he quickly answered. It was beyond Viserys' expectation that he could wipe out the Blood Mummers. This famous mercenary group seemed to be vulnerable and was buried silently in the Twins. What was even more unexpected was that the harvest of this trip was so rich. Asha Greyjoy, the daughter of the sea monster, and some of the Ironborn hid in the mountains of the west. When the White Walkers were repelled, they did think about returning to the Iron Islands. However, the fleeing ships were damaged, and then the human coalition broke out in civil war. The Riverlands quickly became a war zone, and all the key roads in the west were strictly blocked. These Ironborn did not dare to act rashly, so they stayed in the mountains and occasionally went down to rob. However, she finally had the opportunity to return to the Iron Islands, but she heard that the Iron Islands had fallen into the hands of her second uncle Euron Greyjoy. Based on her understanding of her second uncle, Asha did not return to the Iron Islands to join Euron, but continued to hide in the mountains waiting for an opportunity. She finally waited for the opportunity she wanted. Meeting Viserys directly was Asha's biggest opportunity, and she was also an important gain for Viserys. Euron Greyjoy had asked his king several times to take his nephew Theon away, but was rejected by Viserys because Theon was a weakness of Euron, and the same was true for Asha. This pair of siblings was a weapon for Viserys to knock Euron at any time. Another important gain was Qyburn, who could be regarded as the leading doctor in the world of ice and fire. Although his medical skills were unconventional, the effect was extremely amazing. And he was also an all-round talent, with a little magic-rich imagination, and good at invention. The next morning, after a night's rest, Viserys left the Twins. He did not go to the Westerlands, but returned directly to King's Landing. Asha Greyjoy requested to join the kingdom, unlike her uncle, and was allowed to do so. She first returned to the mountains to find the remaining Ironborn who were loyal to her father, and then led them to King's Landing to receive their duties. As for Meester Qyburn, he first followed Asha back to the mountains, and then returned to King's Landing with the Ironborn. Viserys also had an important plan for him. Viserys rode a dragon back to King's Landing. King's Landing is now very lively. The news of the Vale surrender was first transmitted back by water, followed by the official announcement of the Raven. Rhaenys rode a dragon back to King's Landing faster than the Targaryen army, and was warmly welcomed by the people, and even had the title of Dragon Queen among the people. Daenerys, who was left behind in Pentos by Viserys, recently rode a dragon, and came to King's Landing with the Prime Minister Jon Connington, who was in charge of the overall situation in the rear, and the Minister of Finance Illyrio Mopatis. 3 dragons gathered in King's Landing. When was the last time there was such a grand occasion? The middle-aged man with grey-red hair, wearing the medal of the King's Hand, was standing on the wall of the Red Keep on Egan's High Hill, overlooking the whole view of King's Landing, including the 3 dragons flying overhead, and couldn't help but sigh. To be precise, it's not 3 dragons, but 8. Lord Jon Connington. I feel like I've returned to the most prosperous period of the country in an instant. At this time, a bald eunuch with his hands crossed in his sleeves came over and said, Chapter 578 Gathering at King's Landing. Daenerys set out to King's Landing this time, and also took away the other 5 young dragons living in the royal forest. to prevent the last incident from happening again. Viserion would be in danger if he left the young dragons without the protection of the young dragons. But in fact, the young dragons have grown for more than a year and almost 2 years, and their size has changed significantly. The largest red dragon Vaga has even reached a length of 8 or 9 meters, including the tail. The red scales are like a blazing flame, and the huge dragon head can swallow a sheep in one bite. The growth rate of the young dragons is very fast. At the beginning, Valerian grew 15 meters in a year, while the other 2 brothers were only 5 or 6 meters. Vaga, the eldest sister of the 5 young dragons, is even more talented than Regal and Viserion. The other young dragons are not inferior at all, and they are catching up bravely. Robert wasted the treasury and owed millions of gold dragons. I thought the country had lost hope, but I didn't expect hope to come so quickly. Seeing the 2 people on the wall turned their heads and looked at him, Varys exchanged glances with Illyrio, then shrugged his shoulders and said, "Lord Varys." John Connington did not notice the exchange of glances between Varys and Illyrio, and only nodded slightly to greet the visitor. "Long time no see." Of course he knew Varys. John Connington was the hand of the king and the commander of the entire army of the Mad King Era's second. Varys and John Connington were once in the same palace, and the 2 were colleagues. It was just that they each had their own duties at the beginning. John Connington was young and in a high position, so it was inevitable that he was arrogant. Therefore, his relationship with this intelligence minister was average, and he did not deliberately make friends with him. He only contacted him when he was needed. However, now, John Connington has gone through more than 10 years of twists and turns. The young talent he once was has become a middle-aged uncle with unshaven beard and messy hair. He wears dark leather armor, a long sword hanging from his waist, and a grey cloak behind him. If it weren't for the medal of the king's hand on his chest, he would even be mistaken for a passerby or a mercenary. The whole person looks very low-key and restrained. It's a pity that, if the Mad King had listened to my advice, he might not have fallen to the point of being killed by the Kingslayer. When old friends meet, it is inevitable to start the topic with reminiscing about the past. Varys persuaded the Mad King not to open the gates for Tywin Lannister. However, the Mad King, who always listened to Varys' advice, suddenly accepted the advice of Grand Maester Pycelle for some reason. He ordered the Lannister army to open the gates of King's Landing, and then encountered a massacre. The Mad King ordered the detonation of wildfires, but was killed by the Kingslayer to stop it. But John Connington didn't seem to want to bring up the topic of the past, because it had always been an insurmountable obstacle in his heart. Yes, it is true. The middle-aged man with grey-red hair was silent for a moment, but still nodded slightly. But good and bad are interdependent, and what happened in the past also made the king of today. Your Majesty repelled the White Walkers, and saved all mankind, swept across the 7 kingdoms, and regained the Iron Throne. His achievements are unmatched. Then John Connington nodded to Illyrio and Varys and said, "I still have something to do. Lord Illyrio, Lord Varys, I'll take my leave first." John Connington said goodbye and left, and the 2 important ministers of the Royal Council naturally watched their leader go away respectfully. Then when the middle-aged man's figure completely disappeared, Illyrio's smile on his face was restrained again, and he turned his head to look at Varys. Egan. However, the fat man in a gorgeous robe just started, but was stopped by Varys shaking his head. "Hush." Illyrio showed a puzzled expression on his face. "There are not only my little birds in King's Landing, but also the bastards of the north." Varys looked around very carefully, and found that there were indeed maids passing by who looked over here, but they only took a look, and then left in a hurry. Then he breathed a sigh of relief and spoke. The bold eunuch was caught off guard by Ramsay during this period. The powers of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Minister of Intelligence were slightly conflicting, so there was naturally an innate and irreconcilable contradiction between the two. Varys used to walk among the dignitaries in King's Landing and rest assured, but now Ramsay's arrival has given him a great sense of crisis. There have even been several leaks that have been personally questioned by Viserys, which has made Varys a little anxious. He knows that this is the Ministry of Internal Affairs taking action against him, so he must cheer up to meet the challenge of the bastard. However, there is actually nothing wrong with the Red Castle. The secret passage in the Red Castle was sealed and filled in a long time ago. Without this passage, Plus the guards of the Red Castle have been replaced by all unsullied. It is simply impeccable. Moreover, Ramses Viserys' loyal dog. Now that the king is sweeping across the 7 kingdoms and is in his heyday, he will only lick his ass and will not have any second thoughts. As for Varys' little bird, it is difficult for it to penetrate the Red Castle. The matter of Aegon's secret communication with the church was personally ordered by His Majesty. You should not ask about it easily. Then Varys told his friend frankly that Illyrio had just come to King's Landing from Pentus and did not know much about the political situation in King's Landing. Your Majesty and the Queen are both young and fertile. Although a princess has just been born, it is only a matter of time before a prince is born. For Aegon, it is not easy for him to keep the title of a prince throughout his life with a strong emperor. The two talked as they walked and soon disappeared in the garden. On the towering mega tower of the Red Castle, Viserys hugged the girl who flew into his arms and turned around. I miss you so much, brother. It has been a long time since I last saw little Dany. The last time was when Viserys went to retrieve the lost dragon, and this time Daenerys came to King's Landing to attend the ceremony. The country will unify and settle accounts with the remnants of the previous dynasty, and a long trial will be held. If one case is tried one by one, it may take months or years. Viserys decided to cut the Gordian knot and try to shorten the time to within 15 days. Husband. I also took my sister to King's Landing these 2 days. And Arianne also sat sideways on a chair in a gorgeous long dress. The Queen of Dawn has the most perfect figure, a face full of exotic styles, and her every frown and smile is full of charm. Facing the clear sky and the warm breeze, the white gauze curtains and skirts fluttered gently. It is said that 3 women make a play, and now the eldest Princess Rhaenys, Daenerys, and Queen Arianne are gathered in this room. Chapter 579 Plague. 2 months after Viserys returned from his northern tour, it had been a while since the unification of the 7 kingdoms. In addition to Princess Daenerys, Prime Minister John Clinton, and Chancellor of the Exchequer Illyrio Mopatis, the main nobles from all over the 7 kingdoms and the newly nominated Minister of the Council of the King also arrived in King's Landing one after another. With the constant flow of merchant fleets and traffic, King's Landing has entered an unprecedented grand occasion since the turbulent period, surpassing Old Town in one fell swoop, to become the largest city in Westeros in terms of scale and economy. The country is peaceful, there is no war, the people live and work in peace, the climate is warm, and grain production continues to increase. Westeros has a special climate. After the harsh winter, the long summer has arrived. 3 or even 4 grain crops can be produced in a year. The first batch of grain harvests after the unification of the 7 kingdoms arrived at this time. Its existence greatly alleviated the pressure of the food crisis in King's Landing. Carts of grain were lined up in a long line, and the kingdom's army escorted them all the way from the rich river bay to King's Landing to save the crisis of the kingdom's capital. After all, King's Landing now carries a population far beyond what other cities can bear. The influx of refugees from the north has brought great pressure to the Riverlands, the Westerlands, and the Vale. Moreover, the wars in the 7 kingdoms are fierce. This is a game for the princes and nobles. However, the reality hidden under the legendary epics, war strategies, etc. is even more cruel. The war has brought painful scars to the country. The people are living in poverty and there are dead bones on the road. Moreover, wars are often accompanied by the emergence of epidemics. They come quietly and take away countless lives. When Viserys toured the north, he did not find that the epidemic had quietly broken out in the Riverlands. As the quasi-governor of the Riverlands, Earl Geoffrey Bracken went north to the Twins to reorganize. He discovered this small-scale epidemic through the report of his nobles for help. Perhaps it is related to the corpses left behind in the war. After all, the Riverlands is the last battlefield to resist the White Walkers. A large number of dead legions are natural culture dishes for cross-mutation of bacteria. They brought terrible viruses with the wind and snow. Fortunately, due to the intensive war, the population density of the Riverland dropped sharply, and those who had the conditions had already fled to the main cities in the south, blocking the transmission of the virus, so it has not caused very serious losses. Spring is the peak time for plague. Earl Geoffrey Bracken had experienced a spring plague when he was young. Of course not the spring plague in 209 of the Aegon calendar. That plague even spared many dignitaries such as the king and the prime minister. However, although this plague is not so huge, it is also not to be ignored. The lessons of the past are vivid. It was contained in time before it spread widely, so it was discovered quickly and stopped quickly. However, the method of stopping the epidemic is relatively less humane. People in this era are even more afraid of the epidemic than war, and there is no good way to govern it. Only the most primitive and terrifying method can be used. The river army surrounded the hardest hit areas of the epidemic in a net-like manner, and then shot and killed the people of all the local villages with bows and arrows from a distance, and then set the epidemic area on fire, burning the bodies clean. Fire is the most effective way to fight the epidemic in people's understanding. For the Red God followers, fire is also a way to purify all sins. Because of Viserys' intentional balance, the Red God believers in King's Landing have become more and more, gradually squeezing the living space of the Church of the Seven Gods, so that the huge Church of the Seven Gods will not control the beliefs of all the people. A monk in a red robe spewed flames in the downtown area of King's Landing, attracting the crowds to watch and cheer, and even some generous spectators would throw a few copper coins and silver deer as rewards. Lady Nastrika helped me reward a gold dragon. A noble lady with brown curly hair wore a green gauze floral dress, like a flower in bud, and wore the Tyrell family's coat of arms on her chest, then turned her head and told the family nun with acne on her face next to her. This sister Nastrika heard her lady's order and hesitated a little, but then saw the little beauty's affirmative eyes and had no choice but to nod. Yes, my lady. Then the nun took out a glittering golden dragon from her sleeve with a distressed look. If it was before, she would never care about a golden dragon for the master, but now. The nun shook her head and threw the gold coin to the red-robed monk, who was performing hard, in exchange for the other party's ecstatic expression. A golden dragon is worth a lot of money. Many families in the Seven Kingdoms cannot earn a golden dragon in a year. The red-robed monk couldn't help but kneel on the ground and kowtow a few times. Thank you, the Honorable Miss Marguerite Tyrrell, for your donation. Then the red-robed monk stood up and drank another sip of an unknown liquid, and a 2-meter-high flame spurted out of his mouth. Let's cheer for the great Tyrrell family. The audience around immediately cheered and cheered warmly, but the noble lady of the Tyrrell family just smiled shyly and left here with her skirt lifted. Ordinary people have no way of knowing the fate of the top dignitaries in the Seven Kingdoms, nor are they qualified to know. They thought that the Tyrrell family had fallen, but now they still look extremely rich and have a deep foundation. Although the Tyrrell family of Highgarden was deprived of Highgarden and became the Tyrrell family of Starsport, after all, the residual power of 300 years still exists, and the people still have, or for the Rose family. Lady Olenna Redwine's plan to break through Viserys, send Marguerite to the Red Keep, and then lead the Tyrrell family back to the court failed, but the old woman did not give up, but found another way. Willis Tyrrell took office as a tax collector in King's Landing. She took the opportunity to let her sister go to her brother, and finally sent little Rose to King's Landing, and told her good granddaughter to make the name of the Tyrrell family in King's Landing regardless of the cost. Is the Tyrrell family rich? Although millions of gold dragons were confiscated in one go, a lean camel is still bigger than a horse. Although the Tyrrell family is no longer rich, it will not starve to death. After all, the family's strength has been greatly reduced. However, even in this situation, Lady Olenna still instructed her granddaughter to forcibly prop up the Tyrrell family's facade. The intention is naturally difficult for ordinary people to understand, but the effect is certainly there. From the most ordinary people and peddlers in King's Landing to the places where luxury stores sell ivory, gold and jade, and the dignitaries in King's Landing, everyone knew the name of Miss Marguerite Tyrrell in the shortest time. They also knew that the Tyrrell family had not completely fallen and was still very wealthy, and they were in awe of Willis, who had just taken office in King's Landing, and did not dare to mock him. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 580, Minister of Craftsmen and Minister of Agriculture. In the Red Keep, a series of issues are being brought to the table. The first is about the need to add seats to the Royal Council. Currently, Viserys' Royal Council is headed by the Prime Minister John Connington. Below him are the Minister of Finance Illyrio Mopatis, the Minister of Justice Prince Oberyn, who is also the commander of the 2nd Legion, the Minister of Intelligence 8 Claude Spider-Varys, the Minister of Admiralty Earl Geoffrey Bracken, the Minister of War Dothraki Cargo, etc. The Grand Maester was nominated as Dr. Marwyn, and Dr. Bull accepted Viserys' appointment as the Grand Maester of the Iron Throne, but refused the position of Dean of the Seminary. He doesn't like management, likes to study alone, and can answer questions for the king, so he is only willing to serve as a doctor in the Department of Magic and Mysticism in the seminary. The position of the first dean of the seminary is temporarily held by the Archbishop of the Great Sept of Bela, and Melisandre is the priest and mentor of the Red God Department. The Archbishop is also qualified to attend the Council of the King, but he is not summoned to the meeting on weekdays. Then the King's personal advisor Tyrion Lannister is qualified to attend the Council of the King, and Ramsay, the head of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The newly nominated positions to join the Council of the King include the Minister of Crafts and the Minister of Agriculture, and the importance of these two positions is becoming increasingly apparent. One is about pursuing scientific and technological progress, inventions, and creations, and improving productivity, and the other is about people's well-being and eating enough, so it was unanimously approved by the Council of the King. For the nomination of these two positions, fierce open and secret struggles broke out in the court of King's Landing. In the end, Master Tob Mortho, the great craftsman who had cast the magic weapon Dusk for Viserys, got the support of Viserys, and became the Minister of Crafts of the Iron Throne as a civilian. This is actually a subtle suppression of the powerful forces by Viserys, telling the world that his determination to support the common people, to take power has not changed. The king's move naturally won the support of the general public. They crowded in the square in front of the Red Castle, and shouted Viserys' name, and the nobles who became the object of ridicule also dared not speak out. However, Viserys did not put extreme pressure on the nobles. Instead, he gave them a sweet gift. After a fierce competition, another Minister of Agriculture was finally nominated as Earl Alistair Florent of the Florent family. Like many other nobles in the Reach, the Florent family can also be traced back to the legendary human king Gars Greenhand. The ancestor of the Florent family was one of the 3 sons of Flor's Fox, the daughter of Gars Greenhand. Even the Florent family has always claimed that their bloodline is more noble than that of the Tyrell family and their inheritance rights are more advanced. In the field of planting, who can be better than the descendants of Gars Greenhand? He is the replica of Shenning in the world of ice and fire. Therefore, coupled with the powerful strength of the Florent family, it even unexpectedly got the support of the former feudal Lord Tyrell family. After a lot of open and secret struggles, they finally won the position of Minister of Agriculture. Lord Alistair Florent was a tall, thin elder with silver grey hair and a long, pointed beard surrounding his slender noble face. Your Majesty. He looked polite and cultured. Although he was a little older, his eyes were still bright. In sharp contrast, Tob Morso, who was also nominated as the new Minister of Craftsmen, was a bold old craftsman next to him. His palms were rough, and he wore clean but not very presentable clothes. He came to the throne room, and walked in front of the Iron Throne. He didn't even know which leg he stepped on, and his mind felt blank. Haha. The local dignitaries of King's Landing around him couldn't help laughing at the funny appearance of this civilian minister. The mocking laughter made Tob Morso even more nervous. The old craftsman had cold sweat on his forehead, and then he followed the example of Lord Dale of Brightwater and bowed, his voice trembling. Your Majesty. The crowd suddenly burst into laughter, and the Blackfish Sir Brendan Tully, who was standing in the front, wearing black armor, and with grey hair, swept into the crowd with a lightning-like gaze. These mocking voices stopped abruptly like shit being clamped off in a toilet. After arriving in King's Landing, Sir Blackfish was appointed by Viserys to serve as the new commander-in-chief of the capital's garrison, replacing the former Blackworm. From now on, the Unsullied Legion will be used as a royal guard to protect the safety of the royal family. Then John Connington, the Prime Minister, spoke a few words, probably to encourage his colleagues in the future to do their jobs well, be loyal to the royal Targaryen family, and work together to build the country. The two new ministers bowed again to thank them and stepped forward to be personally awarded medals by the king's hand. The Florent family is very powerful and once sent thousands of people to support their own feudal lords, the Tyrrell family. During the Battle of Star Shuttle, the Dothraki attacked from behind. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, Lord Dallister decisively surrendered to the Dornish. However, it turned out that Lord Dallister Florent's move was very correct, because all the nobles of the Reach who surrendered to the Dothraki were chopped to death, and even the Duke of Mace of Highgarden was not spared. These barbarians don't recognize any family emblems. No matter how noble your bloodline is, or how much power you have, you are all lambs, to be slaughtered in their hands, and they chop off your heads with one knife. And Lord Dallister Florent's ability to obtain the position of Minister of Agriculture actually involves more political games and considerations, and it is not that easy and simple. Because he is a microcosm and representative of the political situation of the previous dynasty, his daughter married Randall Tarley, Lord of Hornhill, and another daughter Rhea married Leighton Hightower, an old man in Old Town. His niece Selise married Stannis, and another niece Delena Florent was the mother of Robert's illegitimate son Edric Storm. Viserys gave Alistair Florent a seat on the royal council, which indirectly showed his forgiveness for the other nobles of the previous dynasty, and gave them a reassurance. In the final analysis, this is a game of power. The political situation in King's Landing is unpredictable. For upright northerners like Eddard Stark, abandoning their family business and coming to King's Landing is like never looking back. No wonder all the northern kings who went south in history seemed to have no good end. Edition. Outside the cell of the Red Castle, Lady Catelyn, dressed in a simple dress, still looked haggard, and then nodded to the unsullied soldier beside her. "Thank you." Wow. Then two unsullied soldiers walked up expressionlessly and opened the door of the prison. Chapter 581, Prisoner. The sound of heavy chains rang out. Although the throne room was packed with people, it was silent. No one spoke. Everyone held their breath and looked outside the throne room. Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, was wearing prison clothes, with heavy chains tied to his hands and feet. His grey-black hair was disheveled, his beard was untidy, and his eyes were a little dull. He was escorted to the throne room by the unsullied soldiers. He looked at the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms around him with a slightly confused look. Most of them were unfamiliar faces, and only a few of them were still familiar. They excitedly greeted Eddard Stark. "Lord Stark." Lord Eddard Stark, one of the burly northern nobles, wore the emblem of the Winter Sunday. His beard trembled slightly, and he looked a little excited, because this was the first time their Lord Stark had been out in public for more than half a year. He had been imprisoned in the Red Keep and no one, except Lady Catelyn, had the right to visit him. Lord Karstark. Eddard dragged his heavy chains and passed through the crowd on both sides of the throne room under the escort of the unsullied soldiers. He heard the voices from both sides and saw the familiar faces. The confusion on his face faded a little, and he responded in a hoarse voice. These people were all surviving northern nobles. They had surrendered to the Targaryen army after the Battle of Riverrun, and even incorporated into the regular army a long time ago, disrupting the 2nd and 3rd legions and following a Beren to the expedition to the west. Another part served in the Golden Company, and followed Viserys to defeat Stannis and crush the resistance of the Stormlands. Even many northern nobles have made great contributions, and have been promoted or awarded. The climate and terrain determine the hard life of the northerners. The bitter cold in winter makes the northerners very different from the southerners south of the neck. They know that winter is coming, since they were born, and they must be prepared to survive. Therefore, in such an environment, the northerners have no time to care about empty politeness, court rituals, fancy culture, or any martial arts competitions. They speak very directly and do not know how to adapt. The wishes they express are also very simple. The Stark family has ruled the North for thousands of years and has long been deeply rooted. They hope that the governor who will rule the North in the future will also be a northerner, not a governor who will be parachuted from somewhere. This is their only demand. The stubborn and xenophobic character of the northerners is somewhat similar to the xenophobia of the Dornish. If outsiders want to rule the North, it will probably be very difficult. The North fought side by side with us against the common enemy of all mankind, and resolutely surrendered after King Robert was defeated and captured, and made great contributions. Later dynasties would have an evaluation of the previous dynasty that was not objective and fair. Generally speaking, they would try their best to belittle the other party and gain a relatively legitimate reason for themselves. It is rare that they would raise the evaluation of the previous dynasty to a higher level. The Targaryen family once despised Robert Baratheon as a usurper and refused to admit that he had obtained the sovereignty of the kingdom for 10 years. However, since Viserys was determined to establish a new country and separate from the previous Targaryen dynasty, he recognized the existence of King Robert based on this need and admitted that he had seized the entire country. The Targaryen dynasty was destroyed by Viserys' father, Mad King Aerys II. Political compromises are often mutually beneficial, and the reversal of tone in the court is only a matter of a moment. It is common for skilled politicians and nobles to say one thing in the morning and deny what they said in the evening. Therefore, the usurper became King Robert, but the characterization of that war did not change. It was still the usurper's war. Robert usurped the Iron Throne of the Targaryen family and became the king of the Seven Kingdoms. And Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, walked to the front of the stage with heavy shackles on his hands and feet. With his straightforward character, he naturally couldn't figure out what the subtle changes in words meant, and he didn't want to think about it. He also saw a few familiar faces at the forefront of the throne room. 8-clawed Spider Varys, Prince Oberyn of Dorne, and former opponent Jon Connington, but most of them were still unfamiliar faces, including the commander of the Golden Company, Maes Toyne, the Dothraki Blood Guard Cargo, and the commander-in-chief of the Unsullied Legion, Black Worm. Their eyes were like knives, scraping fiercely at Eddard Stark. "It's been a long time, Lord Eddard Stark." Petty Baelish, wearing a black cloak, also stood in the front row of the ministers and nodded slightly to Eddard with a fake smile. On the other side, the king's advisor Tyrion Lannister, who was standing on the steps in front of the Iron Throne, coughed lightly at this time, raised his head, and looked at the silver-haired young man wearing the Valyrian steel crown on the Iron Throne, and then continued to speak. "Your Majesty, the people of the North actively surrendered and did not resist the unification of the country, and the sins of the usurper's war have not been settled, and the North has not been recovered. Therefore, Lord Eddard Stark is still qualified to retain the title of Duke of Winterfell." Tyrion's voice echoed in the silent throne room. This was certainly not his own opinion, but a preset line and script. The haggard and unshaven Lord Eddard Stark thought about his wife's instructions to him before she left. Then he was silent for a moment, took a deep breath, bowed his head to the Iron Throne, and saluted in a hoarse voice. "Your Majesty." Lord Eddard gave in, bowed his head, and called you Your Majesty. All the northern nobles present breathed a sigh of relief except for one person. Ramsay Snow's father and brother are dead, but Ramsay is not as eager to get his own surname as he was in the past. Now he is not in a hurry to change his surname to Bolton, because he has other plans. He saw that Eddard did not show his tough spirit as a northerner, and he refused to bow to Viserys, but gave in right away. His eyes were slightly gloomy. He was very ambitious, and aimed at the north, but then he shook his head, and showed a bright smile. Viserys sat on the Iron Throne without speaking, but only nodded slightly. Eddard Stark, who was present as a Duke of Winterfell, dragged his heavy shackles to the side, and stood beside Oberyn. Lord Eddard Stark. Oberyn had escorted Tywin Lannister back to King's Landing. The Dornishman had dark skin, and a smile similar to Ramsay's on his face, and then greeted Eddard Stark. "I have heard of Lord Stark's reputation for fairness and strictness a long time ago." Prince Oberyn. Eddard had just been released from prison. He had been in prison for so long that he had been suffocated, but he really had nothing to say to Oberyn, so he just nodded and responded hoarsely. At this time, another voice came from the Iron Throne, which immediately attracted the attention of both people. Lord Geoffrey Bracken. Chapter 2. Try to revise it in the morning. Chapter 582. Enfeoffment Ceremony. Jon Connington, the Prime Minister, wearing the hand of the king on his chest, came to the steps in front of the Iron Throne in place of Tyrion. He looked down at the large group of major nobles from all over the Seven Kingdoms. Even the minor nobles were not qualified to enter the throne room. Then he started from the first person on the list, Lord Geoffrey Bracken. At the front of the Iron Throne's ministers, the grey-haired old admiral was wearing armor and looked still strong. His son Hendry Bracken stood behind him. Then he walked out of the crowd and came to the avenue in the throne room, then knelt on one knee. "Your Majesty." He first knelt to the young king on the Iron Throne, and the armor rubbed against each other, then stood up and nodded slightly to the hand of the king on the steps. "Lord John Connington. Your Excellency, there is no need to be polite." As the third Prime Minister of Viserys, John Connington was very clear about the other party's qualifications and status in the entire new dynasty system when Lord Geoffrey Bracken saluted him. Lord Geoffrey Bracken was the first hand of the king, Prince Oberyn was the second, and he was the third, so the grey red-haired man also nodded slightly in return. John Connington then glanced at the note in his hand, and then began to recite Lord Geoffrey Bracken's achievements. As the commander-in-chief of the Dragonstone fleet, he sheltered the queen and the prince who fled to Dragonstone during the most critical moment of the War of the Usurper, and then followed Viserys to the continent of Essos to open up. In the end, the Dragonstone fleet was one of the main forces in the counterattack on Westeros and successfully recaptured the Iron Throne. Needless to say, Geoffrey Bracken's achievements were ranked first among the ministers, and he was the first to stand up and accept the title. "Lord Geoffrey of the Bracken family of the twins, you are willing to swear eternal allegiance to the Iron Throne, to your king, to the Targaryen family, to guard the Three Rivers, to protect the local people, to perform your duties, and to adjudicate disputes impartially." John Connington recited the oath of the governor, and the grey-haired old general knelt on one knee again and spoke solemnly. "I swear, your majesty." Lord Geoffrey Bracken obtained the twins as a fiefdom and became the governor of the Riverlands, holding great power. The second person to be canonized was the commander of the Golden Group, the third legion of the kingdom. Viserys originally planned to put John Connington in the second place to coordinate the overall situation in the rear and mobilize food and supplies to support the frontline operations, which was also a great merit, but he encountered his own opposition. John Connington thought that he could put others in the front to win their hearts. Lord Mistoyne. Mistoyne led his army to attack Dragonstone Island and surrendered King's Landing without bloodshed. He then defeated Stannis and captured the Stormlands. He also made outstanding contributions and was one of the people who made the greatest contributions to the establishment of the new dynasty. However, because of John Connington and other reasons, the Council of the King considered the issue of control when discussing the enthronement of powerful lords in various places. The Council of the Kings unanimously agreed that the generals who conquered the local area should not be enthroned here, but should be enthroned in other places, to facilitate the country to take the initiative and form a trend of being too big to lose in the future. Therefore, Mistoyne was given Casterly Rock, the former Lannister family, and was the first governor of the West. All the meritorious soldiers of the Golden Group under him were also given fiefs in various places. After all, the Seven Kingdoms were completely shattered in several wars. I don't know how many families with a long history perished in just a few years, so there are many vacant castles and fiefs. The soldiers of the Golden Company only accounted for a small part of the total number of canonizations, but they were scattered all over the country. The middle-aged general wearing golden armor and unshaven beard also knelt on his knees and swore his eternal loyalty to the Targaryen family. Then the third person to be canonized was the King's Hand John Connington. He was loyal to the Targaryen family. He was the Prime Minister of Viserys' father, Aerys II, and was exiled because of the defeat, but he had no complaints about the Targaryen family. Then he surrendered to the new king, helped Viserys seize and build Pentos, and became the engine for launching a counterattack on Westeros in the future. He transported a large amount of food and supplies, and sat in the rear to coordinate and dispatch. Therefore, although John Connington did not personally go to the front line to participate in the battle, he was also considered to have returned home in glory. He was a Stormlander and the former Earl of Griffin's Nest. Now he has been given the title of Storm's End and the Governor of Stormland. Thank you, Your Majesty. John Connington looked vicissitudes of life, kneeling on one knee in front of the Iron Throne. After 10 years of exile from the hand of the king, he now made a comeback. He had mixed feelings in his heart, but then he restrained his emotions and stood up to continue the next canonization. Basically, the canonization of each governor received thunderous applause from the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. The fourth was Euron Greyjoy of the Iron Islands. He was given Pike City and canonized as the governor of the Iron Islands. Urin had served before Viserys counterattacked Westeros and made meritorious contributions in the war against the White Walkers. He risked his life and drove a ship full of wildfire down the Green Fork River and crashed into the army of dead people crossing the river, successfully shattering the ice and annihilating a large number of whites. Later, when Oberyn led his army to attack the Westerlands, he helped him to capture Lannisport by surprise and finally defeated Tywin Lannister and recovered the Westerlands. Therefore, no one could question his position and title as the governor of the Iron Islands. However, the expression on the face of Asha, the daughter of the sea monster, who was present while holding her brother Theon, was a little ugly. However, she was not a fool and did not dare to jump out and object at this time. Urin, the evil eye, knelt on one knee and solemnly swore his eternal loyalty. Then he stood up and opened his arms to enjoy the applause of the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. Then he looked at Asha provocatively. "My good niece, you should return to the Iron Islands, because this is your hometown." Urin suddenly whispered as he passed by Asha. "Uncle will love you well." Urin's expression was gloomy and evil, but it earned Asha's angry glare. Then Urin laughed, pinched little Theon's cheek, and retreated to the ranks of the ministers in the throne room. The throne room was far away from the audience, so John Connington naturally did not know what Urin said to his niece, but he still coughed lightly and continued to speak. The last governor of a foreign family was Petty Baelish, who rode into the Vale alone and finally put down the rebellion and recovered the Vale. He was appointed as the governor of the Vale, but was not given a castle. He lived in the Eyrie as a fake father. What's going on? No Prince of Dawn? All the governors of foreign families were appointed, but Oberyn was not there. This made the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, especially the nobles of Dawn, talk about it. Maybe it has something to do with his massacre of the city. How many ancient families have been inherited? Too cruel. This man. Oberyn's expression was very indifferent, as if he had known the result long ago. He stood in the front of the ministers and listened to the discussions behind him, most of which were even sarcastic, but he did not look back. Chapter 583. One step back, the sky will open up. In fact, when he brazenly ordered the massacre of the nobles of the West, he had already thought that there would be a backlash from the noble forces. Oberyn was a person who broke the rules, and so was Viserys. But the nobles did not have the courage to find trouble with Viserys and the Dothraki, because they did not want to become a lunch for the dragon or reason with barbarians, who could not even speak the language. The fate of the nobles who dared to resist the king had been seen. Therefore, they could only put all the spearheads on the Prince of Dawn. He was a barbarian, an uncivilized Dornishman. He broke the rules of the noble game. Hatred did not involve family members, and it should not be eradicated. For example, if the precedent of the Reigns of Castamere was opened and allowed, everyone would slaughter each other, and there would not be so many families that have been passed down for thousands of years. They have long loved and killed each other, and drowned each other in the long river of history. Before returning to King's Landing, Oberyn had actually received a large number of impeachments and protests from the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. The Iron Throne may have been under pressure to not canonize him, or it may be due to the huge power behind Oberyn. He has been given the most titles. If he is given another title, he will almost be the second king under the Iron Throne. As the Prince of Dawn, Oberyn has the powerful Dawn as his backing. He is also the commander of the 2nd Legion, and has 20,000 battle-hardened soldiers of the kingdom. Moreover, he is also the king's in-law. Since ancient times, in-laws' interference in politics has been full of bloody internal struggles, and the story of the Targaryen family's in-laws' interference in politics is also the same. If Oberyn is given another governor, it may be difficult to end. Therefore, when the royal council made a discussion, Oberyn himself was also present as the Minister of Justice. He himself proposed not to give rewards, not to be in the limelight, and to make a smooth transition. In this game of power, many people like Petty Baelish racked their brains to make further progress, and did not hesitate to use all conspiracies and tricks. However, for truly smart and rational people, taking a step back often leads to a broader sky. Oberyn calmly proposed to take a step back, which naturally won the unanimous approval of the royal council. Therefore, he knew long ago that his name was not on the list of governors, but he was still the Minister of Justice of the kingdom, holding the power of adjudication second only to the king, even higher than the governors of various places, with 20,000 heavy troops stationed near the royal forest to protect the capital. Oberon's choice was rational, and he took a step back at the last moment to preserve his existing power. The ceremony of the enthronement ceremony has not yet ended, and all the governors of Westeros who are not from other families have been enthroned. The remaining few problems, such as the overseas city-states, the Dothraki problem, and the Dorne problem, have long been solved. The overseas Andalus and Pentus are not in the enthronement sequence, but were secretly granted before this. Viserys had promised Illyrio to grant him the position of governor of a place, so he was nominated as the governor of Andalus. And Bessie Joyce, the commander of the 1st Legion stationed at England, is one of Viserys' most trusted and respected generals, because of the connection with the Black Mist. He was appointed as the governor of Pentus, the only local official who had both fiefdom and military power in the kingdom system across the Narrow Sea, and who was in charge of military and political affairs. He guarded the overseas territory for the kingdom, and Maistoin's troops were not stationed in the west. Because Viserys knew very well that he, Myra of the Kingsguard, and Brynden Tully, the commander-in-chief of the capital garrison, were people who would never betray. The Black Mist saved their lives, and improved their strength, but it also controlled their lifeline. As for the Dothraki, who paid a heavy price, and made the greatest contributions in the war against the White Walkers and the 2 conquest wars, they also received fiefdoms. After the war, they will cross the Narrow Sea by boat and return to the continent of Essos. The vast plains southeast of Pentus are their temporary home. Viserys promised them that in the future his whip will point to the east, conquer more vast lands, and the entire Dothraki Sea will be their back garden. They will be superior to other tribesmen, become the superior nobles among the Dothraki, and drive other inferior tribesmen to fight. The big pie painted by Viserys made the Dothraki warriors who shed blood and sweat for the foundation of the kingdom excited. They raised their scimitars and shouted the name of the cow, and their voices shook the battlefield of Star Shuttle City. As for the last Dorne issue, Viserys had promised before that all his reforms to the kingdom would not involve Dorne, which was a return for Dorne's support at the time. Dorne still maintains a status above other 7 kingdoms. They can continue to maintain the traditional aristocratic system of Dorne people, nobles, tenants, warriors, etc. The Iron Throne will not interfere too much in this. The Dornish nobles were naturally excited, and a large number of them knelt down in a sparse manner, and their eyes looking at the nobles of the other 7 kingdoms were a little more condescending. They had invested in Viserys a long time ago, and even the queen was a Dornishman. It was natural for them to obtain such a status. The rest of the nobles of the 7 kingdoms were naturally upset by the contempt of the Dornishmen, who used to be regarded as barbarians, but they could not vent it. Because now everyone knows that Dorne's following the dragon's merits is a great contributor to the construction of the kingdom. The Dornishmen won the victory, and the king was more tolerant of the Dornishmen. There are more and more Dornish merchants in King's Landing, squeezing the living space of many merchants from other places. Merchants from other parts of the 7 kingdoms used to bully the Dornishmen, but now they have also turned around. However, the Dornishmen were arrogant, and Tyrion, who was the king's personal advisor in the royal council, saw it. He avoided Oberyn, and then privately raised his concerns to Viserys. Tyrion claimed that he did not hate the Dornish prince because of the massacre of the Lannister family. But it is obvious that, even if Tyrion was betrayed by his family, it is impossible to say that he has no complaints when such a terrible thing happened, and his family was killed. Tyrion was worried that the Dornish, relying on the power of their relatives and their special sense of superiority, might become a cancer in the kingdom system in the future. After all places in the 7 kingdoms had undergone reforms, but only Dorne remained in a transcendent position. However, Viserys did not explain Tyrion's concerns in detail. He just remained silent for a moment, and told him to think about it carefully. Tyrion did not understand what he meant, but he was also a smart man. After Viserys' suggestion, he went home, and thought about it carefully, and then his back was wet with cold sweat. He figured out Viserys' method to curb Dorne. Chapter 584 Back Garden. Viserys' reform was a reform system that broke the aristocratic autocracy, improved the status of the common people, and centralized power. That is, the king was once greater than the nobles and the common people. The common people were loyal to the local lords. The lords were loyal to the greater lords. And finally the king. And this system may not be wrong, because in the final analysis, the world is still a minority of people who control the majority. However, the problem is that the aristocratic power below the king and above the common people has become too huge after a long period of development. They are so huge that they can easily overthrow the royal power, and any king who does not conform to their interests will be unhesitatingly joined forces to oust or kill. And the common people are also helpless in the face of the deep-rooted aristocratic power. In this era, any farmer who dared to resist the nobles, even in the face of heavy taxes, and wanted to pay less food, would be judged as theft. Who did the farmers steal? The food they grew themselves. Naturally, they stole the food from the nobles. They only left a little food for their tenants to survive, so that they would not starve to death. Even in the face of famine and war, they would not even leave this little food. If you want to eat, you have to join the army and fight. Therefore, in the aspect of the growth of the nobles, the high royal power and the lowest civilians are both victims. Viserys cut the nobles because their interests were too rich, and the interests of the nobles were cut off, and the civilians and the royal power would naturally benefit. The royal power is the symbol of the supremacy of the country, and the civilians are the largest part of the country. Viserys' benefit to the civilians will certainly be actively supported, and the status of the civilians has been improved under his rule. However, if it is only one place, such a reform may be insignificant, and it will not cause any waves. These oppressed people will not rise up to resist. But when all other places in the country have completed the reform, the people have land to cultivate, there are no high taxes, the state officials are clean, and the nobles dare not be domineering. The only place left will become the target of public criticism. Therefore, Dawn is beyond the system of the kingdom. Now in the short term, the Dornish people are proud and vent their former resentment in one breath. But in the long run, the only beneficiaries of Dawn's transcendent status are the nobles of Dawn. The lower class people of Dawn and even the merchants who come and go still do not benefit, and even live worse than the people in other parts of the Seven Kingdoms. At that time, the status of both sides was reversed again. It was not that the Dornish people were so high and mighty, but that all the people of Dawn, except the nobles, packed up their bags and moved to the north overnight to live, escaping from the rule of the nobles in Dawn. And if the Dornish nobles found this problem and wanted to stop it, what should they do? He only had two ways. One was to strictly prohibit escape and kill people, and the other was to follow the reforms in other parts of the Seven Kingdoms and gradually release the interests in his hands, so that he would be no different from other places in the Seven Kingdoms. According to Tyrion's understanding of the nature of the nobles, they will definitely take the first approach first, but this is only a temporary solution, and may even raise a voice of resistance, so they will eventually have to take the second approach. Tyrion, who has thought it through, only felt cold sweat on his back, looking at the Dornishmen who are now so proud that their noses are about to rise to the sky. He only feels a little pitiful. At the same time, he is even more awed by this king who looks young, but is actually very sophisticated. However, if you think about the fact that the other party was born in King's Landing, or even the royal family, a place full of lies, conspiracies, and calculations, he fled his hometown at the age of 7 or 8, and then worked hard all the way, almost starting from scratch, to build a huge country. It is naturally easy to explain that he can have such means. After all, people will change with the changes in the environment, and the ability to learn to adapt is the greatest talent. After Viserys has appointed all the governors of other surnames, the next thing is the family affairs of the Targaryen family. The nobles of the Seven Kingdoms below were crowded with people. In addition to discussing why Beren, the general of the Targaryen family, did not get a fief, they also found a problem. That is, there was no governor of the Reach among the governors, who had just been granted fiefs. Where did the Reach go? Did His Majesty make other arrangements? The nobles whispered and discussed, and at the same time, their eyes could not help but glance at Willis, who was at the back of the order of the ministers. He was an ordinary tax collector, so he stood very far back in the order, almost standing at the door of the throne room. It was a pity that the once glorious heir of Highgarden had fallen to this point, but he was leaning on a cane with one hand, wearing the emblem of the Highgarden rose on his chest, and his shoulders were very straight. Although he heard the discussions around him and felt the eyes falling on him, Willis Tyrrell also remained calm and said nothing. Then a voice sounded again in front of the Iron Throne. Rhaenys Targaryen, the respected princess. Rhaenys was dressed in military uniform, looking heroic, and her footsteps sounded. Tap tap. Then she walked out from the front of the crowd, drew out the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister, that flashed coldly at her waist, and knelt on one knee, to lean on it in front of her. Your Majesty. The brown-haired girl in the bright lady's armor said something, but the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms at the back were too far away to hear it clearly. Some of them couldn't even see the face of this princess clearly, but they still looked forward. They had all heard of the beauty of this princess, who inherited the advantages of Prince Rhaegar and Princess Dawn. At the same time, she was also one of the dragon riders of the Targaryen family. She was very active on the battlefield, and had made many contributions. If they could marry this princess, many nobles of the Seven Kingdoms were slightly moved, but they just thought about it. The current Targaryen family would never marry a dragon rider. Everyone knew that she would be the king in the future. Then Viserys personally appointed Rhaenys as the Duke of Summerhall. Summerhall is the summer palace of the Targaryen family. There is a precedent for appointing the Prince of Summerhall in history, so this is not a title created by Viserys himself. After Viserys appointed Rhaenys as the Duke of Summerhall, he immediately appointed his sister, Daenerys Targaryen, as the Duke of Dragonstone. The Duke of Dragonstone has always been a symbol of the crown prince of the Targaryen family. His Majesty still appointed the Duke of Dragonstone after having Princess Diana, which has caused some discussion. However, these discussions are not even as intense as Rhaenys being appointed the Duke of Summerhall and Daenerys being appointed the Duke of Dragonstone. People thought that His Majesty relied more on Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal. But after all, Princess Diana is still just a baby in swaddling clothes, and she is a baby girl. If His Majesty has a prince, perhaps the dispute over the heir will be settled. Therefore, neither the Dornish nor the other nobles of the Seven Kingdoms paid much attention to it, as it was just a topic of conversation. However, the decision made in the throne room was a bombshell. The Forgotten Reach would be absorbed into the crown, and Highgarden would be the royal garden. Chapter 585 Special Prisoner. For a long time afterwards, the most discussed topic was the disappearance of the administrative division of the Reach. The former nobles of the Reach became the king's personal army and the nobles of the royal territory. Some people went to see Willis, hoping to see anger, fear, or hysteria on the face of the former Highgarden heir. It would be best if he could stand up and oppose, make a scene, and then be beheaded. However, to their disappointment, Willis Tyrrell did not say a word throughout the whole process, but just lowered his head and leaned on his crutches. After that, he did not make any extreme reactions after the enthronement ceremony of the Red Castle was over. He just focused on doing his own thing and his own job. A tax official under the Chancellor of the Exchequer. These days, Willis Tyrrell still ran around in a carriage every day, regardless of his inconvenience in his legs and feet, tracking down tax evasion in the local area or the caravans, and reading the account books by candlelight until late at night, recovering a lot of taxes for the treasury. The knowledge he had learned played a significant role. Willis Tyrrell was not just a paper talker, although this shameful title may accompany him throughout his life, even after his death. When future generations mention this name, they may first think of the case in which he once commanded the army while reading books, which eventually led to the annihilation of the army, to warn others. But Willis did not care about the ridicule of others. He seemed to have been awakened by the war that accompanied his life. He had no opportunities before, but now he can be fully busy, patiently starting from the most basic things little by little, without being arrogant or impatient, and taking one step at a time. Willis's low-key tolerance disappointed many people who were afraid of chaos in the world. However, although the heat gathered in a short period of time, it will soon be covered by bigger things. The much-anticipated public trial is finally about to begin, and a huge temporary trial court is being built in an orderly manner in the square below the Red Castle. Quick, move faster. Bring this piece of wood up. The clear sky, the hot sun, the construction officials with hats on their heads, and the sweaty workers are constantly busy building the roof and finishing the work. This temporary courtroom is almost ready. It is located next to the sea, and you can hear the sound of the tide hitting the rocks and the salty sea breeze. At that time, chairs will be placed in the venue, which can accommodate up to thousands of people to watch the ceremony at the same time. Of course, if you choose to climb a tree or stand on the roof far away, the number of people you can accommodate can be a little more, which is a number that guarantees safety. The Unsullied Legion will surround the venue throughout the whole process to prevent anyone from taking the opportunity to cause chaos. After all, the country has just emerged from chaos, and there are still many people who are hostile to the Iron Throne. Everything is not so stable now. As for the trial process, there are countless cases involved in the War of the Usurper, big and small. This public trial is a thorough settlement of the War of the Usurper, which will last for about half a month. It is enough to become the biggest topic of conversation for the people of King's Landing after dinner during this period. However, before this public trial, there is still a case to be settled. This case may not be very eye-catching if it is placed in normal times, but it has become the focus of countless people's attention at this time. King Viserys is not in King's Landing now. After the coronation ceremony, many dignitaries in King's Landing have not left. They need to wait for the subsequent public trial, and Viserys himself took his wife and children to High Court for vacation. He was too lazy to bother with the numerous cases in front of him, and handed them all over to the Minister of Justice for full trial. Only in the last few days of the trial of important figures, he would preside over it personally. Now, the platform for the public trial outside the Red Castle is being built. Going up the steps, a preliminary trial is taking place in the throne room of the Red Castle. There is silence in the throne room, only the crackling sound of the bonfire. The many nobles of the 7 kingdoms who are watching the trial look serious and dare not make any noise. On the corridor in the center of the throne room, a burly prisoner is tied up in the center. The Attorney General Oberyn sat on the Iron Throne, crossed his legs, and gently stroked the cold armrests with his palms. He was a little absent-minded, and it was unknown what he was thinking. At this moment, the door of the throne room was pushed open, making a heavy sound. Rumble. 6 unsullied soldiers wearing black dragon scale armor and spiked helmets on their heads, holding spears and escorting a prisoner into the throne room. Here they come. All the nobles of the 7 kingdoms, including the prisoners kneeling on the ground and the chief judge sitting on the Iron Throne, all looked slightly terrified. Even Oberyn's fingers felt a sharp pain. It turned out that when he was slightly distracted just now, his fingers touched the sharp edge of the iron chair, and a cut was made, and blood immediately overflowed. The man with dark and shiny hair and a solemn face condensed his eyes slightly, squeezed his fingers gently, and a scarlet blood bead appeared in his palm. Then Oberyn wiped the blood from his fingers, and raised his head again. Since the unsullied soldiers escorted the prisoner into the throne room, the atmosphere here suddenly became tense. The nobles of the 7 kingdoms could not help but whisper. The reason was that the identity of the prisoner being escorted here was too special. In theory, he should be handed over to Viserys for trial, and no one else was qualified to judge him. Unfortunately, His Majesty the King was not in King's Landing at the moment, and all the current legal matters were handed over to the Minister of Justice of the Royal Council, because this was his duty. But strictly speaking, the protagonist of this trial was not the other party, but the prisoner's strong request, and Viserys promised him, so he was taken out of prison. The prisoner with messy hair and beard was escorted to the stage in the throne room by 6 unsullied soldiers. Kneel down. The unsullied soldier spoke in a rough common language, trying to make him kneel down, but he insisted on not kneeling, and the expressionless unsullied soldier's eyes suddenly turned cold. His hand grasped the dagger at his waist, ready to cut his hamstrings. They were killing machines. They never needed to consider the consequences when executing orders. It was enough for them to just hear the orders and complete them. At this moment, the Chief Judge Oberyn, who was sitting on the Iron Throne, raised his hand to stop them. Stop. Wait a moment. Then Oberyn nodded to several unsullied soldiers and let out a sigh of relief. Thank you for your hard work. Leave now. Chapter 586. Trial by Combat. Oberyn knew that these unsullied soldiers were really ruthless. If they said they wanted to kill someone, or cut off their hands and feet, as long as they said it or took action, you'd better believe that they were not joking. Because Oberyn had never seen an unsullied soldier joking, Oberyn spoke to stop them, and the unsullied soldiers looked up at Blackworm, who was standing on the steps, and stared at the prisoner below with a slightly cold look, and then nodded. Wow. 6 unsullied soldiers let go of the prisoner and stepped aside. King Robert of the Baratheon family. The unsullied soldiers escorted the prisoner to the Iron Throne. The atmosphere in the field was a little tense. Then Oberyn, as the chief judge, put down his legs, coughed lightly and spoke. The person who came was the former King Robert Baratheon, who was detained in the prison. He had been imprisoned in the Red Keep for more than a year. This was his first appearance in front of the world. Even before this, like Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, people had rumored that the two had died in the Red Keep and were tortured to death. However, it now seemed that Eddard was not dead, and there was no sign of torture on his body. Viziers would not lynch them. King Robert was also unharmed, but his face was a little pale because he often did not see the sun. His beard was untidy, and the steel beard under his chin had now become a steel ball. His hair was messy and long and curly like a chicken coop. Hearing the voice from the Iron Throne above, the prisoner standing in the center of the throne room below slowly raised his head. His eyes were full of bloodshot, and he looked a little chilling. However, Oberyn was not afraid of Robert's eyes. Although Robert could be called brave and a synonym for strength among the kings, the Prince of Dawn was no worse. King Robert, the man beside you is the assassin of your second brother, Stannis Baratheon, Ser Balançoine of Stonerhelm. Oberyn spoke loudly while sitting on the Iron Throne, his voice echoing in the silent throne room. He committed murder, murdering a nobleman outside of a fair war. Oberyn did not even blink when he said these words. If Balançoine had committed murder by assassinating Stannis, then Oberyn would have been considered an unforgivable sin and would not deserve to die 10 times. However, brazenly ordering the massacre of a city and the assassination of a nobleman in secret are actually two different things. The former would not dare to raise a voice of protest unless the nobles united together. It is like killing one person can only be called a killer, while killing 1,000 or 10,000 people can make you a king. The two have roughly the same meaning. Therefore, Oberyn, who killed many people, is still famous in the Seven Kingdoms, while people like Balançoine or Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, are just thugs or killers with cruel personalities or stab in the back, and are regarded as the shame of knights, only slightly better than the regicide. However, the gods have given us the opportunity to reform. Between joining the Night's Watch and going to the wall or trial by combat, Ser Balançoine chose trial by combat. I believe he will be given a fair trial. The throne room was silent, with only Oberyn's voice. Balançoine's father, Earl Gullion of Stonerhelm, clenched his fists nervously, and then Oberyn shrugged and continued to speak. But unfortunately, no one is willing to fight for your second brother, the deceased Kinslayer Lord Stannis Baratheon. That's why we disturbed your rest in the prison of the Red Keep. King Robert, are you willing to fight for Stannis? After Oberyn finished speaking, all the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms standing in the throne room looked at each other, and then couldn't help whispering. Now there is only one chair in the throne room, that is the Iron Throne, and all the other chairs have been removed. When the king sits on the Iron Throne, the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms, including the royal family, can only stand or kneel. And from now on, the Iron Throne will only be used by the king, and no one else can touch it. Now, in addition to the 3 colleges under construction in King's Landing, there is also a courtroom under construction. In the future, it will become the exclusive office of the Minister of Justice. Now, before the courtroom is built, Oberyn still needs to borrow the throne room to work. The nobles of the Seven Kingdoms were talking about it, but Robert Baratheon, who was standing in the center with his hands and feet tied with chains, did not say anything. He just turned his head and looked at Balançoine, who was also slowly standing up beside him. He was like a silent lion, which made the burly Ser Swan feel a little nervous. Although he was very confident in himself, and King Robert had been imprisoned for more than a year, he himself agreed to this trial. But he didn't know why Balançoine felt a little uneasy when he faced Robert's eyes. No one is willing to fight for Stannis. Humph, he is such a person. There were whispers in the throne room, and then King Robert, who was standing in the center, finally spoke. His voice was low and hoarse, like thunder, and then a cold snort came from under his messy hair. "Come on. I'm his elder brother. I will fight for him." Then he raised his hands, the heavy chains made a sound, and 2 unsullied soldiers came forward to untie the ropes for the former King Robert Baratheon. Robert did not take the opportunity to attack, but just moved his hands and feet slightly. Then, the unsullied soldiers brought the armor and his usual storm hammer. On the other side, Baron Swan also had soldiers to help him put on the armor. Wearing the bright armor, the heir of Stonerhelm didn't know why he was breathing a little fast and seemed a little nervous. He couldn't help turning his head to look at King Robert several times. To duel with a king? This was something Baron Swan had never dared to think about before. After so long, he might regret his impulse now, but he didn't expect that the final trial by combat would be King Robert, who was imprisoned in the prison, fighting for Stannis and fighting against himself. What if he accidentally killed King Robert? Would he also be called the Kingslayer? The heir of Stonerhelm was a little upset, and naturally his breathing was a little fast. On the other side, Robert Baratheon seemed very calm. Although the life in prison made him thinner, it had not yet destroyed his body. He put on the last piece of black breastplate, and with one hand steadily took the heavy storm armor from the unsullied soldier's arms, then turned his head and looked at Baron Swan, who was also dressed neatly. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 587 Duel. I don't like Stannis. I never did. Robert Baratheon said, his voice rumbling, as if wearing armor and holding a warhammer reminded him of the glorious days. His temper is as stubborn as a stone in a toilet, smelly and hard. Especially after hearing that he killed Renly, I wanted to crush his head. Robert stood in the throne room holding a warhammer, and the nobles of the 7 kingdoms around him retreated, leaving a large open space for the 2 people in the field. Baron Swan rolled his throat slightly, holding a spear in his hand, and cautiously kept a distance from Robert Baratheon. Although he was confident the other party had killed Rhaegar's fierce general on the battlefield. However, Robert seemed to ignore Baron Swan's caution. He strolled in the throne room with his warhammer in hand. His hair and beard were messy, but his bloodshot eyes were bright. He was like a lion inspecting his territory, with anger accumulating in his body. But, at this moment, Robert's footsteps suddenly stopped, and his voice became a little louder, which scared Baron Swan, who was holding a spear, and his heart skipped a beat. Boy, you should never kill Stannis with the most despicable means. Robert Baratheon did not wear a helmet, but only armor. His hair was disheveled, his eyes were glaring, and his eyes seemed to be choosing people to bite, burning with rage. Then he swung the warhammer in his hand suddenly, and then smashed it down. Seeing King Robert's sudden attack, the heavy storm hammer came down like a mountain, carrying a strong wind. Damn it. Baron Swan naturally did not dare to be careless, nor did he dare to take the hammer head on. He had rich experience in duels, and he knew that the hammer was very powerful just by listening to the sound of the wind. Clang. Then Baron Swan used his spear to poke, took a step back, and dodged the hammer. Bang. Robert's hammer hit the ground hard, smashing the gorgeous floor tiles of the throne room, causing the nobles of the 7 kingdoms to gasp. King Robert's power is too strong. On the second floor corridor of the throne room, Illyrio, the Minister of Finance, who did not participate in the trial, but was just passing by to visit, couldn't help but smack his lips when he saw this scene. TSK. His friend Varys, who was standing next to him, crossed his hands in his sleeves and shook his head slightly when he saw this scene, and smiled helplessly. It's always like this, Illyrio. You have to get used to it. The lords are in high spirits, not caring how the people below end up. Our Majesty is out on vacation again, and this Majesty is smashing things in the throne room. This floor tile should be worth dozens of silver dear. It seems that the finance minister needs to pay for it. A brick in the throne room could be equivalent to the income of an ordinary family in the 7 kingdoms for half a year in the outside world, but it was smashed to pieces in a duel. But this is reality. Die. King Robert saw that Baron Swan was retreating, but he did not let him go. Instead, He took advantage of the victory and chased him. He roared in a low voice and chased after him again with his warhammer. Whoosh, the heavy warhammer hummed in the throne room with the violent wind, and Balance One relied on his youthful strength and flexibility to deal with it. Clang clang clang, the sound of weapons colliding rang out from time to time in the throne room, and the battle between the two sides was fierce. The Earl of Stonerhelm, the father of Balance One, looked a little nervous. He kept turning his head left and right, looking for someone to ask for help. He didn't know if his son could defeat King Robert, who was famous for his strength. On the steps, the interested smile on Oberyn's face slowly disappeared and turned into a calm scrutiny. The commander of the Unsullied Army, Blackworm, who stood beside him with his hands behind his back, also clenched his fists. They were all experts, and they could see that this duel was indeed a battle between masters. King Robert and Balance One, the heir of Stonerhelm, were not easy to deal with. At this time, clang, another violent collision of weapons, sparks burst out, and the spear in the hand of the heir of Stonerhelm broke with a sound, and the sharp spearhead flew out, causing another exclamation, but fortunately no one else was hurt. Balance One took a deep breath, and cold sweat flowed down his forehead. Shit. Then he threw the wooden pole in his hand and hit King Robert, but the other party did not dodge or evade, and let the wooden pole hit him. His body was as still as a black tower, and he walked towards him with the hammer. Snap. Then Baron Swan took a new spear from a follower beside him, and waved it in his hand, still sharp, and held it tightly in his hand. Clang clang. He deflected King Robert's attack, and retreated again to create distance. Baron Swan's tactic was to rely on his relatively flexible body to deal with King Robert, who was famous for his strength, and consume the opponent's physical strength. He didn't want to fight head-on with the opponent, but sometimes he had no choice. An expert knows the strength of the opponent as soon as he makes a move. Robert's hammer is powerful and heavy, and Baron Swan naturally dare not deal with it, although he is also a well-known strongman in his hometown. Another hammer hit in the air. King Robert, wearing black armor, had a heaving chest, panting a little, and his hands moved much slower. After all, he had been in prison for too long, and his physical fitness had deteriorated seriously. He had just been dealing with Balance One for a while, and his physical strength was a little bit off. Are you tired? Respected King Robert. On the other side, relying on his young and energetic body, Balance One was holding a spear, and also panting a little, but he was simply testing the tired Robert Baratheon, and constantly stimulating him with words. It's only been a few rounds. You can't do it anymore. It seems that there are too many brothels in King's Landing. Have they drained you dry? The fact that King Robert was a prostitute king had long been spread throughout the 7 kingdoms. He left his beautiful queen and went to find those prostitutes who were not very good looking. It was just because no one dared to say it when he was in power. However, now that King Robert has become a prisoner, he can naturally ridicule without restraint. Don't talk nonsense, boy. However, King Robert just took a few deep breaths, with a somewhat ferocious expression on his face. Then he raised his hammer again. Now is just the beginning. I'm just warming up. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 588. Skeleton Mountain Range. Your Highness. Your Highness. At this moment, Rhaenys appeared in the side door of the throne room without knowing when, and quietly observed the battle. The nobles of the 7 kingdoms who were concentrating on the duel were slightly startled and hurriedly saluted. Yes. But the brown-haired girl just nodded implicitly and then climbed the steps. Your Highness. When Oberyn, who was sitting on the Iron Throne with his legs crossed, saw Rhaenys coming, he quickly put down his legs, stood up from the Iron Throne, straightened his clothes and bowed slightly. Uncle. Rhaenys turned her head and looked at the 2 people who were fighting fiercely below. Is he the one who killed my father? Robert was imprisoned in the Red Castle for such a long time, but Rhaenys had never seen this person, because she was afraid that she would not be able to help, but order him to be killed. It's him. Oberyn stood in front of the Iron Throne and nodded slightly. Will he die? Rhaenys took off the deerskin gloves on her hands, and asked without hesitation. Although she is learning combat skills from the female knight, she is not as sharp as Oberyn, a master who has been in the arena. Oberyn turned his head and looked at the situation on the scene. King Robert's physical strength was gradually running out. He seemed to be a little behind on the scene. but he was indomitable and even had a faint trend of getting braver with each battle. Then he shook his head and came up with a view that was completely opposite to that of many experienced nobles of the Seven Kingdoms. Unfortunately, I'm afraid not. These nobles of the Seven Kingdoms are not without combat experience, but their combat experience is often on the battlefield, while the arena is a one-on-one battle with restricted terrain, and all kinds of means can be used. In fact, King Robert, a fierce general on the battlefield, has some natural disadvantages in a one-on-one duel, but he can still cope with it with his rich combat experience. The heir of Stonerhelm has a good foundation and a solid foundation. He has the qualifications to become a king's good, but he still lacks combat experience when facing King Robert. Go to hell. Before Oberyn finished speaking, Balance One below sees the perfect opportunity, roared, and wanted to stab King Robert to death with a spear, but he didn't expect that this was a trap set by the other party. Balan's father, Earl Gullion Swan of Stonerhelm, and his friends had even raised their hands to applaud, but they didn't expect the bloody scene that followed to directly shatter their eyes. Boy, you are too happy too early. Robert Baratheon's face showed a fierce look, and his words were as cold as the wind. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. His strong arms grabbed Balance One's spear. The heir of Stonerhelm was panicked and tried to pull it away but failed. Then, before Balance One threw away the spear and ran away, in his horrified eyes, Robert swung the heavy warhammer that others needed both hands to lift with one hand and smashed it hard on his cheek. Puff. There was no fancy technique, just brute force and a simple hammer. The storm hammer smashed into Baron Sven's face, just like smashing a watermelon. Easy and freehand. The hard skull of the heir of Stonerhelm was instantly shattered, and the eyeballs and the eye sockets flew out. The blood and brain mixed together and instantly splashed on the face of the nearest noble, sprinkled on the ground and the stone pillars of the throne room. Half of the broken headless body fell down. The air was slightly silent for a second. The next moment, screams rang out in the throne room, and there was chaos in an instant. The nobles who were splashed with blood and brain on their faces screamed like roosters. The face of Earl Gullion Sven of Stonerhelm was extremely ugly. He did not expect the turn to come so suddenly. His only remaining son died here. Then he turned around with a sullen face and pushed away the crowd, leaving the throne room without waiting for the final verdict. On the steps of the throne room, Oberyn had just finished speaking when he saw this scene and couldn't help but shrugged his shoulders slightly. It seems that Robert Baratheon can live for a while longer. The brown-haired girl beside him held the Dark Sister at her waist with one hand, stroking the hilt of the sword, watching the bloody scene with her eyes wide open, her expression unchanged. Great. After several baptisms of war, the young girl no longer felt sorry for her enemies, and Oberyn was slightly startled when he heard what Renessus said. This way I can have the opportunity to kill him myself. Use this sword. Renessus pulled out a piece of Illyrian steel sword, and the bright sword light illuminated the dark iron throne. This sword was given to Renessus after Viserys returned to King's Landing. Viserys gave me this sword so that I can take revenge myself. Then Renessus turned and left the messy throne room. Oberyn stood there looking at the girl's back for a long time without saying a word. Two unsullied soldiers came forward and dragged away Balance One's body, cleaned up the blood on the ground, and Robert Baratheon was put back in shackles. He did not resist and was taken back to the dungeon. There are so many major events in Westeros recently that people have no time to look at the world except for the merchants coming and going. Every day in this world is turbulent. The Targaryen army took back the Iron Throne and unified the Seven Kingdoms, while on the other side, the Dothraki Sea was unified by Mengo Cal, who never spoke. The bloody battle on the grassland lasted for several months and finally ended with Mengo Cal's defeating all the tribes. The Dothraki people have had several cases of unification in history, all of which were suppressed by a tyrannical Cal, and eventually became the nightmare of the surrounding civilizations. When the Dothraki people unified, Westeros was still in a fierce civil war, and all the attention of the kingdom was focused here. The 1st Legion stationed in Essos deployed troops and guarded against the Prairie Knights from appearing in the heart of the Free Trade City and launching a surprise attack. Even letters of help from Cotter and Norvis flew in like snowflakes, but they were all ignored by Bessie Joyce. Everyone thought that after the unification of the Dothraki Sea, their scimitars would point to the rich trading city-states, but unexpectedly, intelligence came that endless Dothraki people rode their war horses and began to move eastward. What is in the east? No one knows. The east of the Skeleton Mountains is full of mystery. Although merchants from the Jade Sea occasionally come, the mystery in people's hearts cannot be solved. Chapter 589, Grand Maester Purcell. The days before the public trial were filled with numerous minor cases in the War of the Usurper. For example, a knight from the west had burned, killed, looted, and raped women after entering King's Landing, and was accused by the people of King's Landing. A noble from the north burned down a farm, etc. In just 10 years, the former victims or their relatives have not passed away. In addition, as the loser of the West, the royal family supports them, and Prince Oberyn Martell, the Minister of Justice, personally visits these victims. As a result, more and more people who have suffered have the courage to stand up and accuse the thugs who have persecuted their families, the burned farms, the looted food, etc. The Iron Throne requires these nobles who have committed violence to pay back the money and food they have robbed, and those who have committed heinous crimes such as murder and rape have been punished accordingly. Some were sentenced to many years of imprisonment, some had their hands and feet abolished, and some faced hanging or beheading, kneeling on the ground to beg for forgiveness, crying and hoping to join the Night's Watch to guard the border for the kingdom. The Night's Watch also accepted all who came, and received a great deal of manpower for a while. These nobles who joined the Legion would more or less bring some followers to protect themselves. There were not many who were alone. Even at the end of the liquidation, hundreds of new recruits were brought to join the Night's Watch. The commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch, Gyr Mormont, smiled from ear to ear. Today, the Night's Watch has not perished, but after suffering, it once had a scale of 1,000 people, but now there are less than 50 people. However, the war brought a large number of criminals. As long as they did not want to die, they were all stuffed into the Night's Watch. With the addition of such a large number of defeated nobles and soldiers, the scale of the Night's Watch has returned to about 1,000 people, which can be regarded as returning to the state before the war. Of course, this is still far from enough for recovering the north, or guarding the Great Wall. In the future, Viserys plans to continue to expand the scale of the Night's Watch. Form an expeditionary force, let them go out of the Great Wall to open up outside the Great Wall, establish their own bases and castles, and step by step permanently incorporate the land outside the Great Wall into the King's Land. And one day he will ride a dragon to the end of the world and find out the secrets there. Of course, this is the plan later. At present, the White Walkers are still entrenched in the north. The causeway of the Neck has not been repaired, Winterfell is a ruin, and there is still a big hole in the Great Wall. Everything in the north of the kingdom is still in a state of disrepair. Soon, the public trial has lasted for 10 days. The winners are the kings and the losers are the bandits. A large number of defeated nobles have been liquidated, some dead and some injured. Oberyn emptied the prison in King's Landing with the fastest efficiency. For example, the nobles of the coalition captured in the Battle of Reverin have been deprived of their fiefdoms, and there are also the Valerian family who rebelled in the Battle of Dragonstone. The last Earl of Driftston, Morford Valerian, did not get redemption, and was beheaded in court. When Driftston fell, his descendants and wives had been smashed by catapults and the ship sank into the sea. The Valerian family, a distant relative of the Targaryen family, was completely destroyed. Then there was Grand Maester Purcell, who became an increasingly important figure in influencing the course of history in later periods. Grand Maester Purcell. The old and frail Grand Maester had been imprisoned in the dungeon for a long time, but when he was escorted to the court, he still had his pants pooped, and his feces and urine flowed all over the floor along his trouser legs. The nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and the people of King's Landing who were watching the ceremony booed at the Grand Maester's ugly appearance. Oh, Prince Oberyn, I'm actually innocent. I did not betray his majesty. I did not betray. Grand Maester Purcell's hair and beard were pale, and he didn't care about his face at this moment. He had been imprisoned in the cell for such a long time, and suddenly one day he was brought out for trial. He also knew that his death was approaching, and he was so scared that he trembled all over and kept begging for mercy. He was still wearing a bachelor's necklace on his chest, which was made of 24 metal pieces. As his body trembled, it made a sound, but it was roughly pulled off by the unsullied soldiers, and the metal pieces scattered all over the floor. As a Grand Maester of the kingdom, you betrayed your own king, so you are no longer worthy of the Maester's chain. The new Grand Maester, Dr. Marwin, who was sitting under the awning, looked at Purcell's ugly appearance with disgust. He himself looked down on his fellow grey sheep. Now too many Maesters have deviated from their original intention of becoming Maesters. They did not follow their original intention of making the whole world better, but added many political elements. However, the first priority of becoming a Maester is to serve the entire Westeros, even abandoning their own family and surname, and not allowing any political interests to be mixed in. In this regard, Dr. Marwin admired Maester Aemon the most. He was a pure Maester, and his character was unmatched. He could give up the throne in order to stick to his oath. Dr. Marwin, you. Seeing that his former acquaintance had ruined his career, Grand Maester Purcell was suddenly a little anxious. He was still hoping that Dr. Marwin would help him, because they were both from the Citadel, but he did not expect that the other party would actually add insult to injury. Grand Maester Purcell, whether you have been wronged or not is not up to you alone. At this time, Lord Justice Oberyn interrupted Purcell. He crossed his legs and looked at the ugly appearance of the former Grand Maester with a cold light in his eyes. The death of his sister Elia Martell was actually caused by Grand Maester Purcell. Although it was not the main reason, he had already targeted her and was one of the people he wanted to kill. Then Oberyn clapped his hands and asked to summon witnesses. The first person to come on stage was Minister of Intelligence Varys, who had served the Mad King Aerys second. Even when Purcell persuaded the Mad King to open the city gate, Aerys was there. Therefore, he vividly described the scene when Grand Maester Purcell deceived the Mad King. The words of the octopus spider cannot be trusted, my lords. Grand Maester Purcell was still trembling and arguing. However, the girls who were played by Purcell also stood up one after another. As witnesses, they accused the former Grand Maester of being old and frail, and that he was still very vigorous in bed after taking some medicine. He even accidentally revealed his flattery of the Lannister family. Grand Maester Purcell had betrayed the royal family long ago and had been passing on court intelligence to the Lannister family, whether during the reign of the Targaryen king or Robert Baratheon. Chapter 590, Exiled to the Frontier. One witness after another stood up and exposed the Grand Maester, who looked amiable but was actually sanctimonious. The nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and the people of King's Landing who were watching the ceremony also showed disgusted expressions and even couldn't help spitting at Grand Maester Purcell, throwing rotten eggs and fruits. Scumbag. They didn't expect that this Grand Maester had done so many things, and many of them even opened their eyes. He was old enough to be the girl's grandfather, but he stretched out his dirty hands to them. Execute him. Execute him. The first voice sounded at the scene, and then it resonated with the people. More people called loudly, asking the fair Minister of Justice to sentence this scumbag Grand Maester to death, not giving him a chance to live, and not letting him linger. During this period, Oberyn tried many cases fairly and openly. Relying on his smart and intelligent brain, he achieved efficient and accurate cases, so he was loved by more and more people, and even reversed the notoriety he had left behind when he killed people in the West. After all, humans are forgetful. A few months ago, they were Dornish barbarians, but now they have executed the nobles and distributed their property to compensate the people of King's Landing who were plundered. So Oberyn has become a great judge. Grand Maester Purcell, who was surrounded by angry people, was in a mess at the moment. His forehead was also smashed by a flying apple, and blood flowed out. He didn't expect that he would cause public anger. Even his noble friends in the past were unwilling to plead for him, and avoided his eyes. The old man with grey hair and beard held his head, and blood stained his cheeks red. He no longer expected to get away with it. So Grand Maester Purcell pleaded with the judge, hoping to get the opportunity to wear black clothes and join the Night's Watch. However, such an opportunity is not available to everyone. For example, the Valerian family needs the consent of His Majesty the King to join the Night's Watch. But unfortunately, His Majesty the King is now on a southern tour and is recuperating in the royal back garden High Garden. He has not returned yet. Therefore, the chief judge and the other 2 deputy judges had to make the decision. In the square below the Red Keep in King's Landing, 3 judges will be selected every day to judge the case in this public trial. The chief judge is always the unshakable Minister of Justice Aberin, and the other 2 judges are 2 people from the governors and the king's ministers who take turns to judge every day. This damn bastard, the Minister of War, Cargo, who was sitting on the chair on the left, spoke in a stiff and turbid Westerosi common language. Although his level of common language is not good, after all, he has been here for such a long time, and he roughly understood the evidence presented by the witnesses just now. Moreover, he did not speak other common languages very well. The first words he learned were various sports words such as shit and fuck, which are classics that will be passed down forever. We Dothraki people only rape women from other races, and will never touch girls from our own race. Children are still very special to the Dothraki people. Even if they confiscate their families and exterminate their race, they will not touch children who are lower than the wheels. Of course, this is also the cultural difference between other civilizations and the Dothraki. Children in other civilizations refer to people who are not yet 16 years old and whose bodies and brains are not yet fully developed. The Dothraki grew up on horseback since childhood. They traveled all over the world and constantly fought. Therefore, boys who were larger than the wheel size could be called warriors in the tribe and could inherit their father's scimitar to fight on the battlefield. Therefore, the Dothraki would kill children who were larger than the wheel size. Lord Cargo, you are right. When Aberin heard Cargo's words, he turned his head and was slightly speechless. This barbarian sounded proud. Then girls of other races are not girls. But of course Aberin would not argue with the barbarians that the civilized world should fight now. This is the way the Dothraki fight, and sometimes those who claim to be civilized can be more cruel. Lord Aberin. On the other side, Petty Baelish, the governor of the Vale, who was sitting on the left side of Aberin, was wearing a black cloak and a medal of the bird of prey on his chest and spoke loudly. Grand Maester Purcell betrayed his king and caused a tragedy. He should be held responsible for the disaster in King's Landing more than a decade ago. I also suggest that he be sentenced to death. Then Littlefina nodded implicitly to Cargo on the other side. He wanted to get close to this Dothraki, but unfortunately it was a bit like talking to a cow. The other party didn't understand his set of court etiquette at all, but turned his head and picked his teeth carelessly. Lord Aberin. At this time, Jir Mormont, the commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch, pondered for a moment, and then spoke. He also has a place on the judgment stand because he is a garbage bin for criminals. All scum can be received into the Night's Watch, as long as they are still alive, and the Legion is now in the time of reconstruction, recruiting talents. Lord Commander Jir Mormont, do you want this person? Hearing the voice of the commander-in-chief of the Night's Watch, Aberin also turned his head and looked at the other party. Maester Aemon is too old. I think maybe we can ask Grand Maester Purcell to come to the north to help him. Of course, you will make the fair judgment. Although Maester Aemon found his junior, Viserys was willing to personally issue an edict to release his oath and let him stay in King's Landing to live out his life. However, Maester Aemon rejected Viserys' request. He has kept his oath for a lifetime, and he is destined to be buried in the north. Therefore, he will follow the Night's Watch to the north in the future to repel the remaining White Walkers, recapture the north and the wall. But Maester Aemon is indeed too old, and it is unknown how many more years he can live. Now there is 1,000-man Night's Watch, and it is far from enough to have only one Maester. Therefore, Lord Commander Jir Mormont cherishes talents, and shamelessly asks for people at this time. Grand Maester Purcell is still younger than Maester Aemon. Well, join the Night's Watch. After hearing the opinions of the 2 deputy judges and the request of Lord Commander Jir Mormont, Aberin stroked his beard slightly. He suddenly felt that letting this old dog fight in the icy and snowy environment of the north in the future seemed to be a good way to torture him, which would be much more satisfying than hanging him now. Because as a member of the Royal Council, he knew that Viserys was ready to retake the north. As the main force to retake the north, it is no longer appropriate to use a Targaryen army, but the Night's Watch and the Northerners as the main force. Provide them with resources and help, and let them take back their homes by themselves. Then Oberyn sought the opinions of the two deputy judges, and finally sentenced Grand Maester Purcell to join the Night's Watch as a Maester. Chapter 591 Situation. Your uncle has done a good job recently. After reading the information in his hand, Viserys put the letter on the candle and lit it. The flame illuminated his cheek, and then he threw it on the ground, and turned into a pile of ash, and then he looked up. Uncle Oberyn? Queen Irian, who was sitting opposite Viserys, had just read the information, but her face did not show much joy, but a worried look. But I think his torture is a bit too cruel. For example, the heir of Stonerhelm, Balance 1, I think it's no big deal to let him go. After all, he helped us kill Stannis. Irian thought that Balance 1 was just an insignificant little character, and killing him, or letting him go, would not affect the overall situation. She didn't understand why Oberyn didn't choose to let him go, but had to kill him. Before Viserys left King's Landing, he gave all power to Oberyn. He had great autonomy and no one would interfere. Will Lord Gullion Swan rebel because of this? After all, that is his last son. Under the bright candlelight, the beautiful Queen of Dawn then spoke worriedly. Yes or no, it doesn't matter. Oberyn knows what he is doing, and what role he plays. However, Viserys just shook his head slightly and said, as you said, Irian, I don't need to consider how Gullion Swan feels. If he endures it, let him live. If he is dissatisfied and wants to rebel, then kill him. It just serves as a warning to the monkeys. The unification of the Seven Kingdoms does not mean that the soldiers have already retired. In fact, because of the new policy, the soldiers' warlike mood is unprecedentedly high. Although there are no major wars in the Seven Kingdoms, small conflicts are still happening, such as a village being massacred and looted, a noble daughter being kidnapped, etc. And yesterday, the valley just rushed to deliver several heads and a set of bronze armor. They are the heads of the last remnants of the Royce family in Runestone City. After the battle in the Vale, Yohn Royce and his eldest son died in the Civil War. His second son, Robert Royce, led the soldiers to escape back to Runestone City and then stayed indoors. Then Serlin Corbray volunteered to lead his army to attack Runestone City. It took a month to finally conquer the sturdy castle and cut off the heads of Robert Royce and his younger brother, Waymar Royce, the former squire of Serlin Corbray, now the Earl of Redfort under the support of Erleon Royce. Michelle Redford chopped off his wife's head with his own hands in panic and announced that he would completely break with the Royce family to prevent being implicated. Michelle's actions made the nobles of the Vale somewhat disgusted, but his decisive actions still worked, and the action of purging Yohn Royce's followers did not implicate him. The heads of Robert, Waymar and Yassina Royce and the ancestral bronze armor of the Royce family were sent to Highgarden at full speed. However, Viserys did not feel much about this. He just took a look and then waved his hand to let the soldiers bury the three heads. As for the bronze armor with a long history, it was left behind. In fact, he did not want to confiscate the Royce family and exterminate them. He just wanted to take back the Runestone City. However, he did not expect that this group of nobles in the valley, who had just surrendered, wanted to prove themselves. Perhaps they were also fanatical converts and used too much force to directly kill the Royce family. Viserys did not hate Erleon Royce so much, even though the other party had caused him a lot of trouble. On the contrary, he was still optimistic about this person. If Yohn Royce was willing to kneel and surrender, the governor of the valley might not be Littlefina's turn. But it was a pity that this bronze Yohn stood on the wrong team, which eventually led to a death and extinction of the family. The Royce family, which once gave birth to the Supreme King of the Valley, the Five Fingers Peninsula and the Moon Mountains, also disappeared from the long river of history. However, Viserys did not feel sorry for him. Everyone had to be responsible for their own choices, especially when he was the head of the clan and the commander of the entire army. He had more responsibilities on his shoulders. The nobles in King's Landing are too annoying, but I have spent enough time hiding here to seek peace. Viserys teased his daughter, and the baby in the swaddle babbled and reached out to grab him, but was dodged. Diana pouted and Viserys quickly sent his finger over and grabbed his father. Diana smiled. Her pair of violet eyes were extremely pure, without a trace of dust. The only person in the world who could make Viserys willingly surrender was this little princess, and the silver-haired young man couldn't help but smile slightly, pinched his daughter's cheek, and then said, Let's set off tomorrow and return to King's Landing. Although the current public trial is the most eye-catching event in King's Landing, and even the entire Westeros, the operation of the entire country will certainly not stop because of this. Political activities in King's Landing are still going on. Envoys from trade cities as far away as Slavers Bay and the Summer Isles have been waiting in the Red Keep for a long time. The envoys from the free trade cities naturally came to congratulate Viserys on unifying the Seven Kingdoms, while the envoys from Slavers Bay came to communicate with the Iron Throne as usual. However, when they arrived, they were confused to find that the Iron Throne had changed its owner. As for the news from the Summer Isles, they were even more closed. They came to watch the excitement and wanted to see what the legendary White Walkers were. Viserys returned to King's Landing in a low-key manner. It was not so easy for these envoys waiting here to meet His Majesty the King. Originally, these envoys were a little dissatisfied with being left outside, but when they found that the envoys from Bravos and the Iron Bank were waiting outside the door like them, all their dissatisfaction disappeared. The Iron Bank envoy met with Viserys in the throne room. He brought formal documents to waive the debt owed by the Iron Throne. At the same time, in order to show the friendship between Bravos and the Targaryen family, they were willing to provide an interest-free loan of no less than 1 million gold dragons to help the royal family restore and build the country, which caused surprise and shock to the nobles of the 7 countries present. You know, the Iron Bank has always been very careful with money. The envoys of Bravos and the envoys of the Iron Bank separated and handed over a handwritten letter from their seeking Tormo Frega. Got it? The content written on it was about the verbal agreement that the two people had made. After reading it, Viserys nodded and didn't say anything more, but just put the letter on the fire and burned it. The Bravos envoy seemed to be a confidant of Tormo Frega. He also said nothing, bowed and retreated. Chapter 592 Eddard Stark. Yesterday, Grand Maester Pycelle was tried, and today is the trial of nobles of high ranks. In the War of the Usurper, the Wolf, Deer, and Osprey families were the main forces against the royal family, but now all 4 families have fallen from their lofty positions. The North has completely fallen, and Winterfell is still occupied by the dead. The reason why the Stark family can still be preserved is that they did not resist the ultimatum of the Iron Throne. Since the Battle of Reveron ended and Eddard Stark was captured, all the northern troops gave up resistance and joined the Targaryen army to become one of them, making contributions in the subsequent War of Unification. The Baratheon family of the Deer family is also declining in number, and the Stormlands have fallen. Storm's End is currently managed by several other nobles in the Stormlands, and Jon Connington has not taken over yet. The 3 brothers of the Baratheon family, Renly and Stannis, are all dead, and Robert's day is not far away. I believe that he will soon catch up with his 2 younger brothers and go to the 7 Hells together. As for the 2 who had a relatively good ending, they were the Arryn family of the Vale and the Tully family of Reveron. Because Edgemure Tully surrendered at the speed of light and Hoster Tully died in the civil strife, the Tully family saved Reveron and also saved the entire family, but lost the position of the feudal lord and became indistinguishable from the crowd. On the other hand, the Arryn family was actually also very wronged. Jon Arryn was assassinated before the Targaryen army set foot on Westeros. His death also indirectly led to the fall of King's Landing, and the coalition's retreat was cut off by the Targaryen army, and they were almost annihilated in the Battle of the Fields of Fury. Jon Arryn died early, leaving only a breastfeeding son, and the subsequent resistance of the Vale army actually had nothing to do with the Arryn family, but other Vale nobles held power and fought against the orthodoxy of the Iron Throne in order to preserve their own interests. Therefore, the kid from the Arryn family was able to save the Eyrie. Viserys believed that Robert Arryn had his reliable stepfather to guide him. How lucky was he? Viserys' arrangements were all connected step by step, and each link was linked to the other. Hoster Tully and Jon Arryn were already dead, so naturally they had nothing to do with the public trial, but their crimes still had to be made public. Hoster Tully and Jon Arryn were both leaders of the rebels at the time. There was naturally no point in whipping the corpse. In addition to letting the people laugh at the nobles, it also emphasized a concept, that is, the royal power was sacred and inviolable, and even after more than 10 years, they would come one by one. Almost all the criminals who participated in the War of the Usurper, except those who were dead and surrendered, had received fair trials. And then came the heavyweight nobles one after another. The Warden of the North, Eddard Stark, the Lord of Winterfell. Eddard Stark's title is also very long, and his hair is as long as his title. Not long ago, Tyrion proposed that he participate in the enfeoffment ceremony as the Lord of the North. Since then, he has been free from the prison of the Red Keep, and can move freely. The dignitaries in King's Landing have speculated on what political deal the Stark family has made with the king to be released, but in fact, combined with Lady Catelyn's constant running around during this period, building relationships and passing on messages, and even visiting the Red Keep late at night, some guesses can be made. The situation in the north is somewhat special. Like Dawn, except for their locals, it is difficult for outsiders to rule this land, because the people and environment here are very stubborn. His Majesty also wants to use the Stark family to win the hearts of the nobles in the north, but the details of the specific transaction are difficult for outsiders to grasp. Eddard Stark is still wearing prisoner clothes, with chains on his hands and feet. Although he has been released during this period, he still cannot take off the shackles or escape from the eyes of the unsullied soldiers. He had lost face enough in King's Landing during this period, and was also designated as one of the deputy judges today, wearing chains on his hands, and reading out the charges against his father-in-law Hoster Tully, and his adoptive father Jon Arryn. However, after the trial of the two dead men was completed, it was his turn. Eddard Stark was invited down from the stage as one of the deputy judges, wearing shackles on his hands, and standing under the scorching sun with disheveled hair. At this time, there was a commotion in the back. The gate of the Red Keep opened, and two teams of unsullied soldiers raised their shields, and walked down the steps of the Red Keep, to protect His Majesty the King and the Queen. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. All the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms stood up from their chairs, including the only two remaining judges. Today, it was Varys, the Minister of Intelligence, who was on duty, and the other was a baron. Is he Eddard Stark, your father? Irian sat on the chair that had been prepared in advance, holding her long skirt in her hand, and then turned her head to look at the maid behind her. One of Irian's maids was a red-haired girl named Sansa Stark. The girl's cheeks were a little red, and there were tears in her eyes when she looked at her father. She couldn't believe her father's disheveled appearance, but Sansa was satisfied that he was still alive. She and her brother Robb were the deal for their father to survive. Their mother had already told them that they respected their own wishes. Even if their father was finally forgiven and saved his life, they would be left in King's Landing as hostages, and it might be difficult for them to return to Winterfell in this life. However, the brother and sister agreed without hesitation. Yes, Your Majesty, he is my father. Sansa nodded, holding back her tears. On the other side, Robb Stark, one of Viserys' servants, was holding a wine jug in one hand and staring at his father in a daze until he was poked by the boy next to him. Hey, Robb. Sorry, Gendry. The reddish-brown-haired boy looked apologetic. He was a little distracted just now. You shouldn't apologize to me, Robb. His Majesty is calling you. And Gendry shook his head, then pointed forward. Only then did Robb realize that everyone's eyes were on him, including his father. He had been unshackled and dressed in black. Although his cheeks were haggard and his hair was messy, his eyes were still bright, looking at him with encouragement. Kneel beside your father, Robb. Then Robb Stark heard Viserys' voice. Chapter 593, Consecration of Robb. At the public trial, Eddard Stark, the former Warden of the North and Duke of Winterfell, admitted all the crimes he had committed, causing boos from the people present. Lord Eddard Stark was a man of high moral character, impartiality, and reputation in the Seven Kingdoms, but these were only known in the circle of nobles, and he did not promote them. Ordinary people in King's Landing were not qualified to know who the high and mighty Duke Eddard was. In their view, he was just an arrogant and cold northerner. In recent years, there have been especially many northerners in King's Landing, most of whom have poured into the city because of war, squeezing out the living space of many original people in King's Landing, which naturally caused dissatisfaction and regional conflicts. The people of King's Landing do not like northerners, and in their view, Eddard Stark is no different from those annoying northerners, with a rough temperament, a serious appearance, and a serious expression. Now that Eddard Stark had admitted all his crimes, there was naturally a lot of booing, but the former Northern Guardian standing in the middle with shackles turned a deaf ear to it. This was what his wife Catelyn had told him in advance. His wife had paid a great price, and the Northerners would naturally not let him down at the last link. Then Eddard Stark knelt on his knees and kowtowed to beg for the new king's forgiveness. He was willing to take off his crown, put on black clothes, join the Night's Watch, and guard the north for the kingdom. And Viserys also forgave Eddard Stark's crimes, and allowed him to put on black clothes, and become a soldier of the Night's Watch, starting from scratch. Although this was a script arranged in advance after a political compromise was reached, it had to be performed again, which not only punished the crime, but also demonstrated the king's kindness. Lord Stark. Eddard Stark was untied from his shackles, and the Night's Watch soldier Aven Yoren put on black clothes for him. This officially announced that the former Duke of Winterfell had joined the Night's Watch and became an ordinary soldier under the command of the Commander-in-Chief Jair Mormont. He will follow the army to the north to reclaim his homeland. Thank you, Your Majesty, King of the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys' act of kindness was immediately followed by the cheers of the nobles of the north. This honorable and upright lord won the respect and love of many northern families. Although the final outcome was not very good, at least he saved his life, didn't he? After Eddard Stark's affairs were dealt with, there was another important question in front of him, that is, who should be the governor of the North? The people of the North have a strong desire to hope that the people of the North will manage the people of the North. The position of the governor is defined in the new dynasty as a combination of politics, economy, and law, but it does not involve military power. The army is led by the commander of the legion. However, in the war to reclaim the North, Viserys was not going to use his own direct forces again. They had been fighting for years, and had just conquered the Seven Kingdoms for him. Naturally, they should rest and recuperate for a while. Therefore, the war to reclaim the North still needs the Northerners and the Night's Watch to fight by themselves, just like the Iron Islands. Euron Greyjoy and the Ironborn have been busy burning the dead whites and cleaning up Pike Island bit by bit. But in fact, there is no great resistance there. The main force of the dead army has retreated to the north of the wall. The scene Viserys saw twice when he went north was that only some residual whites were left, and there was not even any trace of the White Walkers. There was no need to mobilize the whole country to fight. However, Viserys had already made plans for the next governor of the North. Therefore, when all the northern nobles looked at each other with some flashing eyes, he asked his squire Robb Stark to stand in front and kneel beside his father. Your Majesty. After coming to his senses, the reddish-brown-haired boy immediately understood what happened. Yes, Your Majesty. Gendry. He hurriedly handed the wine jug in his hand to his good friend Gendry beside him. Gendry was Viserys' earliest squire. Like many illegitimate children, his mother was a maid in a tavern in King's Landing, but he didn't know who his father was. Then he followed his master and was kidnapped to the other side of the narrow sea. Later, because of his simple and sensible character, he became Viserys' squire. Gendry took Robb's wine jug and then saw Robb run down the platform and came to his father's side. Father. The reddish-brown-haired boy looked a little excited and uneasy, but he received an encouraging hug from Eddard Stark. Robb, from now on, your mother and brothers and sisters will be left to you to take care of. Eddard hugged his eldest son tightly, with some mixed feelings in his heart. After he was sent to the Night's Watch, Robb naturally became the Lord of Winterfell, and then patted his shoulder. Go. Eddard asked Robb to kneel down in front of Viserys. Then Viserys opened his mouth to confer Robb Stark the title of Earl of Winterfell, but stripped him of the title of Warden of the North and Duke. He is now the king's attendant, and he can return to the north when he comes of age. However, at this moment, Robb knelt on the ground to thank his majesty, and had not yet gotten up. The silver-haired young man sitting in the center of the stage suddenly spoke again. He believed that the Stark family had ruled the North for thousands of years, and was already deeply rooted, and was deeply supported by the people of the North, so he conferred Robb Stark the title of Governor of the North. His words disappointed many northern nobles who secretly aspired to become governors. Some of them had coveted the position of Governor of the North, but they did not expect that they were also appointed. But the next second Viserys' words rekindled the fire in their hearts. Robb Stark, the governor of the North, was too young to have enough experience to govern the North. He needed to study in King's Landing and could not return to Winterfell until he was 16 years old. Therefore, during this period, a steward was needed to replace Robb Stark to govern the entire North. And this candidate will be chosen by Robb Stark himself. After hearing Viserys' words, all the northern nobles present, including Eddard Stark in black and Lady Catelyn, looked at each other. Who to choose? In the end, all eyes fell on the young man with reddish brown hair. Suddenly, he went from being a servant to the Lord of Winterfell and the governor of the North. The ups and downs of life were just like this. The expression on Robb Stark's face was a little confused, but no one could give him a hint at this time. He would have to make his own decisions in the future. Finally, after he glanced at everyone around him, he gritted his teeth and decided on a candidate. Lord Rickard Karstark. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 594, Northern Territory Chief. Robb's choice of Lord Rickard Karstark of Kaha as the Northern Steward was expected and reasonable. He did not disappoint his father and mother's teachings. At least he did not choose Lord Wyman Manderley of White Harbor, or the Countess of Widowwang, who was far away on the edge of the continent, and had no place to go. The Karstark family was a distant relative of the Stark family, and Lord Rickard Karstark himself was an important general under Eddard, so entrusting the North to Rickard was the best choice. Robb chose Lord Rickard. Not bad. Eddard and Lady Catelyn both breathed a sigh of relief. Rickard Karstark, whose name was Colt, was tall and mighty, with long hair and a beard, a grey beard on his face, and a bearskin coat with a dark cloak on his shoulders. Hula. He heard the young master nominate him as the Grand Steward of the North, and he immediately stood up and walked to the front of the stage. He hammered his chest with one hand, making a dull sound, and then knelt on one knee. Your Majesty, I'm willing to take charge of the North for you. Rickard Karstark first knelt on one knee to the silver-haired young man on the stage, and said in a rumbling voice, Winter Sunday, Earl of Kaha. Viserys didn't seem to be too surprised to hear the candidate for the Grand Steward of the North designated by Robb, because Robb's range of choices was actually not large. Although the Manderley family of White Harbor is powerful and extremely wealthy, the Manderley family is not actually a real northerner. They are nobles who migrated to the North later. They are of Andal descent and still believe in the 7 gods instead of the old gods. They have always been somewhat out of tune with other northern nobles. Besides the Manderley family, the people that Robb could choose could not be too weak, otherwise they would not be able to suppress the northern heroes, and they could not be too distant from the Stark family. Therefore, Robb's choice of Rickard Karstark was also within Viserys' expectations. Okay. Viserys nodded slightly, and Rickard Karstark, who was kneeling on one knee below, was immediately happy when he saw the king nod, but he naturally could not show it on the surface. Although Robb could appoint the chief steward, the candidate still needed the king's consent, and since the king agreed to this matter, it was almost certain. Then the burly northerner nodded and stood up, and then knelt on one knee in front of Eddard, who was wearing black clothes beside him, and Robb Stark and his son. Lord Robb Stark, you entrusted the North to me. You will not be disappointed. The North is in your hands, Rickard. Eddard's face was still vicissitudes. He looked at the general who once served under him, patted his arm, and said in a hoarse voice. On the other side, the reddish brown-haired boy still had nervousness on his face. His cheeks were green, and even the hair around his lips had not turned into a beard. I believe in you, Lord Rickard Karstark. This was the first time in his life that he made such a major decision, so that his palms were still shaking slightly, but his heart beat faster not only because of nervousness, but also because of the surging blood. His father went to the Night's Watch, and he would be the Lord of Winterfell in the future, truly participating in this world of great struggle. From now on, there will be more important decisions waiting for him, including power struggles in the palace, and wars. Lord Robb Stark. Lord Rickard Karstark. The scene was immediately filled with the clamor of the nobles of the North. The trial of the former Warden of the North and the Duke of Winterfell was definitely a big event in King's Landing. In the end, anyone with a discerning eye could see that the Stark family and the royal family must have reached some political compromise in exchange for Eddard Stark's life. These were enough for the curious people and those with ulterior motives in King's Landing to discuss for a long time, and even the drunkards in the tavern made up some gossip. He swore that he had witnessed Lady Catelyn walk into the king's bedroom and stay there for a long time before coming out. The scream was enough for the whole Migos holdfast to hear. "You know me." The drunkard's voice suddenly became louder, and he stood up with the wine jug, but he almost fell down. "You know me. I never lie about such things." He staggered with the wine jug in his hand, still drunk. Ha ha ha. His words received a burst of laughter from the drinkers present, and the rolling eyes of the tavern maids. Of course they knew that the drunkard was talking nonsense. A lowly person like him didn't even know which way the king's bedroom door opened, let alone witnessing Lady Catelyn walking into the king's bedroom. But for these low class and vulgar people, there was nothing to do after dinner, so they liked to drink and brag, and make up some gossip about the nobles. The drunkard became more excited when he heard the laughter of everyone, and then he raised his little finger. "Lady Catelyn needs to find a new bed partner, and can't satisfy her noble lady." Bang bang bang. The drunkard's words once again received laughter from the whole room, and the drinkers hit their glasses on the table and drank them all. In the corner of the tavern, a man wearing a white cloak and a hood on his head silently picked up the glass and took a sip. His head was very low, and when he drank, he could only see a rough golden beard on his chin. He listened to these drunkards making up vulgar jokes about the princes and nobles, and couldn't help but slightly grip the hilt of the sword at his waist. Bang. However, at this moment, the door of the tavern was kicked open with a bang, and a team of warriors wrapped in black robes and wearing masks broke in. Their target was directly locked on the drunkard who was full of vulgar jokes just now, and it seemed that they had obtained solid evidence. Making up rumors about the royal family and maliciously slandering the nobles is aggravated. "Take him away," the leading captain said in a cold voice, and the guards of the Ministry of Internal Affairs stepped forward to grab the other party and then tied the drunkard's hands and feet with chains. "Spare my life. Spare my life. My lord, I will never dare to do it again." The drunkard was sobered up by the shock and saw that it was the Ministry of Internal Affairs who took action, and he was scared to death. Of course, he had heard of the bad reputation of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, and no one who went in came out intact, but now begging for mercy was useless. A rag was stuffed in the drunkard's mouth, and he was dragged out by force. Then the captain raised his head and looked around at everyone in the tavern with a cold look. The others hurriedly lowered their heads like frightened rabbits, not daring to look at him. Then his eyes fell on a person in a white cloak in the corner, and his brows slightly frowned. "You. Raise your head." Chapter 595 Customs Headquarters. The words of the captain of the Internal Affairs Corps made the tavern silent, and everyone turned to look at the unlucky guy sitting in the corner. He was wearing a white cloak, with a hood, so that his face could not be seen clearly, and a long sword hanging from his waist. In fact, although such an outfit was special, it was not uncommon in King's Landing. After all, there were many people of all kinds in this city, and it was normal for someone to want to hide himself. After hearing the words of the spy captain, the hooded man sitting in the corner froze slightly with his wine glass in his hand. On the other side, the masked spy captain's eyes were slightly cold, and his palm could not help but grasp the crossbow on his waist. This person made him feel very dangerous, and that was why he started to question him. This was the sixth sense and experience he had developed after working in the Ministry of Internal Affairs for many years. However, he saw the other party put down the wine glass in his hand and then raised his head with surprise written on his face. "My lord, what's wrong?" This is a face that has been weathered and looks about 40 years old. There are already wrinkles on the forehead, and the beard on the chin is messy, with golden and grey mixed in. When the captain of the spy of the Ministry of Internal Affairs saw the other party's honest and simple face, the image of a harmless person suddenly rose. But he still did not relax his vigilance, but walked over with the crossbow on his waist tightly, walked in front of him, looked up and down with a scrutinizing look, and then asked again, "Who are you?" "I rely on this guy to make a living, my lord. You know that it is not easy to get work in King's Landing recently." The man with short golden hair, beard and hooked nose patted the long sword on his waist and then spoke in the dialect of the valley. I'm following a Bravas fleet now. We will stay in King's Landing for half a month. When all the goods are sold, we will import another batch of goods and return to Bravas. Mercenaries are actually legal in many places in the Seven Kingdoms. Although they are not members of the regular army, they are good at fighting and take money to do things. And not all mercenaries would do illegal things, those are the minority. Most mercenaries are still escorting caravans, collecting rewards, and when necessary, they will be recruited into the army to help the loyal lords fight. Bravas fleet. The captain of the spy of the Ministry of Internal Affairs did not relax his brows when he heard the middle-aged man's words, but stretched out his hand. Show me the certificate. The customs of King's Landing issued certificates to every foreign ship entering the port, and every crew member or escort mercenary, even slaves, would have an identity certificate. This is the plan recently implemented by the Customs Headquarters, a department under the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Minister of Justice. The person who proposed it was Davos Seaworth, the Earl of the Rainforest and the Onion Knight, after the Onion Knight surrendered with the army of Storm's End. Fortunately, he was appreciated by Viserys, opened the second spring of his career, and was promoted to the Minister of the Kingdom's Customs Headquarters. He manages all fleets and caravans entering and leaving the port and investigates smuggling, cooperates with the tax department to investigate tax evasion, and cooperates with Sir Brynden Tully of the Capital Guard to arrest criminals. The policy of identity certificate was proposed by Sir Davos when he first took office, based on his previous experience as an excellent smuggler. It can be said that it is very targeted and hits the nail on the head. The purpose of this policy is to facilitate the strict investigation of smuggling, control the entry and exit of people, and facilitate management and other duties. For a time, many evil forces that rely on smuggling to survive were miserable. Identity certificate? Okay, sir. The middle-aged mercenary with golden hair did not hesitate and handed over his identity certificate with a smile. He also looked like an old man who had been in the arena for many years. He was not familiar with the place when he went out, so he naturally did not dare to offend these spies from the Ministry of Internal Affairs. After the captain of the spy from the Ministry of Internal Affairs took it, he simply checked the other party's identity certificate and found that there was no problem. He could only hand it back again, then looked at the other party deeply, and then turned around and asked his men to leave. Go, retreat. The spies from the Ministry of Internal Affairs came and left quickly, disappearing without a trace in less than half a cup of tea. No one knew where they came from or how they disappeared. After all, no one dared to follow this group of evildoers, but the drunkard who had just drunk too much and spread rumors would definitely not be able to get out. Everyone in the tavern felt a little cold in their hearts, feeling that they had escaped a great disaster. They were glad that they had not said much just now, otherwise one more person would have been taken away. Then someone turned around and looked at the middle-aged mercenary who had just been interrogated in the corner and raised the wine glass in his hand. Brother, you were so lucky just now. If those guys found out that there was something wrong with you, I'm afraid. The drinker at the next table raised his glass, and the blonde middle-aged man also shook his head thankfully, raised his glass and clinked it, and then drank it all. Yeah, I was scared just now too. What's your name? Let's be friends. I may have a job to do here in a while. I need a smart hand. I think you are suitable. James. My name is James Stone. My mother is a prostitute and my father is some bastard. Wow, you have the same name as the famous Kingslayer? There are many people named James in the world. The Kingslayer may have died in some corner, and even if he is still alive, how dare he return to King's Landing? If he doesn't hide in the gutter, isn't he afraid of death? The middle-aged mercenary with golden hair and beard mixed with some grey and a hooked nose shook his head and smiled. That night, Cersei asked to see Viserys. She hoped to visit her father. After all, tomorrow was the day of the trial of Tywin Lannister. Cersei had thought of countless ways to save her father, but she was powerless and didn't even have the qualification to wear black clothes. She is no longer a queen who is high above everyone else. She is just a canary who looks glamorous, but is imprisoned in the Red Castle. Her children, Joffrey and Myrcella, may never leave the castle again. so she wants to see her father again tonight and send him off. Coincidentally, Tyrion, who has never visited Tywin since he was escorted back to King's Landing, also requested to visit him tonight. After all, this is likely to be the last night his father is alive. He also has many questions to ask him. However, before that, someone came to his residence outside the Red Castle and found Tyrion. Chapter 596 James. Who are you? Tyrion turned on the lights in the house, and then he saw a man sitting on a chair in the house. He was dressed in casual clothes, carrying a long sword, with brilliant golden hair, green eyes, and a smile as sharp as a blade on his handsome face, looking at him quietly. Because of the betrayal of his family, Tyrion's inner character has become a little withdrawn. In front of outsiders, he is still the smart and clever dwarf, but when he returns home, he always likes to be taciturn and restrain the smile on his face. Therefore, he cleared most of the servants in the King's Landing mansion, leaving only a few reliable old servants. On weekdays, he went home just to drink, read books, and kill time. Tyrion had just lit the candle in the house and suddenly saw a man sitting in front of the table close at hand. He was immediately startled and reached for the dagger at his waist. However, when he saw the face of the person sitting in front of him, he was stunned for a moment. This was such a familiar face, including that familiar smile. Jaime? Tyrion's expression was horrified, and his heartbeat accelerated, even more nervous than when he met an assassin. He just opened his mouth to exclaim, and realized that something was wrong the next second. He quickly shut his mouth, and turned his head to look outside the door. Fortunately, there were not many servants in his house, only a few, so it was not easy to monitor him, even if he wanted to. Tyrion quickly leaned against the door and closed it, and then looked at the man who was still sitting in the chair, carefree and defenseless, and the other party was also looking at him with a sharp look. Tyrion looked up and down at the person who came. He was extremely sure that he was not mistaken. The person in front of him was his brother who had disappeared for a year, Kingslayer Jaime Lannister. Jaime, what are you doing back now? Under the candlelight in the room, the short little demon fiddled with his short legs and walked over quickly and asked with a look of annoyance and confusion. He hired Bronn and a group of mercenaries to take advantage of the chaos, to kill the gold cloaks and rescue Jaime, create an illusion, and then send him to the other side of the narrow sea, so that he would never come back. Unfortunately, the plan went wrong. Jaime was not caught by the gold cloaks, but fought his way out and escaped alone, and then disappeared from the world. Although it was not clear where his brother had gone, Tyrion was relieved. No matter what, Jaime would always have a foothold with his excellent swordsmanship. If he left Westeros, he would always leave a way for people to survive. He thought he would never see Jaime again, but he never expected to see him suddenly in his room today. What? Don't you welcome me? Compared with his somewhat panicked brother, the blonde knight, as the elder brother, seemed very calm, and his handsome face seemed to be more weathered than before. He is Jaime Stone in the tavern during the day. He learned skills from the Faceless Men, but only changed his appearance, not his name. Because the name Jaime is too common. There are grooms called Jaime, blacksmiths called Jaime, and so on. And this name also has a profound meaning to him. He went through untold hardships, terrible sufferings that ordinary people could not even imagine, and finally passed the test, abolished his hands and feet, paralyzed, blinded, etc., and finally joined the Faceless Men, and became a qualified Faceless Man, and his nature was mostly wiped out in these processes. But there is one thing he can never forget. That is, he is Jaime Lannister, the fucking king killer that everyone despises, and his lover Cersei is waiting for him in King's Landing. Therefore, the name Jaime Lannister is also a weapon for him to stay awake and understand who he is in the Faceless Men organization in such an environment. Of course I don't. Tyrion was still annoyed at the moment, pacing in the room. He heard his brother's words and spoke subconsciously, but his tone was slightly higher. Then he gritted his teeth and lowered his voice and spoke again. Of course I won't not welcome you, Jaime. But you don't understand the situation. Tyrion kept pacing in the room, then raised his hand. He seemed to want to say something, but he was speechless and didn't know how to say it. King's Landing is too dangerous for you. Then Tyrion looked into Jaime's eyes and spoke seriously. Yeah. Jaime shrugged slightly and nodded. I know. but I have a reason to come. Why? Tyrion's face was full of confusion. He knew that Jaime was not a fool, but he knew that King's Landing was dangerous, so why did he return? However, Jaime just shook his head slightly, without explaining, and then changed the subject and asked, "How have you been recently, Tyrion?" The little devil was silent for a while, and then spread his hands after a while. "Of course. I serve the greatest king in history, a powerful kingdom spanning both sides of the narrow sea, and perhaps the recovered north will soon be called the Empire. We have wiped out all the rebels in the Fourth Seas, and hung their heads on the tip of the spear. Well, half of them are my family," Tyrion said as he walked to the sideboard, and picked up the wine jug, to pour himself a glass, and then poured a glass for Jaime, and brought it to him, then looked into his eyes and added, "My former family." Jaime did not refuse and took the wine glass, and took a sip, then nodded to show his understanding. He understood that Tyrion betrayed his family. If anyone encountered Tyrion's situation, they would betray, and he also heard the news of the destruction of the Lannister family and the killing of all the members of the family. However, Jaime thought he would be angry, but in fact, it was not even as strong as his concern for Cersei. "What about you?" After Tyrion finished speaking, he looked at Jaime with his eyes sparkling, and then asked. What he was most concerned about was where Jaime had been in the past year, and how he was doing. "Fine." But the blonde knight just took a sip of the strong wine in the glass, coughed violently a few times, and then filled himself a full glass, and was a little concise. The room fell into a long silence. "What do you want to do?" After a long while, Tyrion slowly spoke. The two brothers hadn't seen each other for more than a year, and it was inevitable that there was a bit of alienation in their words. But Jaime came to the door, and Tyrion knew it well, so it was better to ask directly. "Take me to see him." "Cersei? No, your king." Chapter 597 Rejection. "You want to see Viserys? How could you have such a ridiculous idea?" Tyrion felt that the world had gone crazy. Jaime actually wanted to see Viserys, and he didn't hide his identity, but went to see him openly. No matter what his reasons were, Viserys would never forgive him, because he was the king killer, and the king he killed was Viserys' father, King Aerys. How do you think Viserys will punish the murderer who murdered his father? Hanging? Beheading? Or slow slicing? Or burning alive? Do you think you can save your father by turning yourself in? Impossible. No one can save your father, not even Cersei. Tyrion was a little emotional, but he hesitated to speak here, as if his throat was strangled. However, Tyrion was also a smart man. Before he finished speaking, he realized a certain possibility. "You want to assassinate His Majesty?" Tyrion's mind turned instantly, and then he looked at his brother with a sharp gaze. He suddenly realized that Jaime seemed to want to use him to get close to Viserys, and then suddenly kill him. Jaime is the youngest member in the history of the King's Guard. His swordsmanship is unmatched in the Seven Kingdoms, and Viserys is the core of the entire kingdom. It is he who brings together so many armies from all over the world, including the Dothraki. If he dies, so this is your real purpose, Jaime. Tyrion thought it through and calmed down. The excitement just now disappeared, and a thoughtful look appeared on his ugly face. "You pretend to surrender in exchange for a chance to get close to His Majesty, and then suddenly kill him. Killing Viserys will naturally cause chaos in the Seven Kingdoms, each with its own army, and the Dothraki will be difficult to suppress, becoming a source of trouble, and you will be caught and tortured to death. But Cersei, Joffrey, and Myrcella will have a chance to escape in the chaos. Impossible." However, after Tyrion made Jaime's purpose clear, he shook his head slightly decisively. "Your idea is good, but you can't kill His Majesty." Tyrion's words were firm, and there was no room for discussion, which made Jaime, who had always been quite confident and even conceited in his skills, slightly condense his eyes. Tyrion was his brother. He knew his swordsmanship, not to mention that he had learned more assassination techniques from the Faceless Men. In theory, if Viserys was within 3 steps, he would definitely die. First of all, when you wanted to assassinate His Majesty, did you ever think that he conquered Westeros not by any conspiracy, but by sweeping across the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms with his absolute overwhelming strength? Those nobles who were arrogant in the past were beaten by the Dothraki and fled in panic like dogs. and His Majesty has repelled the invasion of the Dothraki several times on the other side of the narrow sea. He personally went to the battlefield, led the soldiers, and led 200 cavalrymen to capture a free trade city-state, and killed all the governors of Pentus. At the most critical moment of the war between humans and the White Walkers, he did not retreat in the face of the Night King, and repelled the Night King with his own strength, and saved the world. Jaime, why are you so confident that you can kill him, instead of him crushing your throat first? Tyrion spoke a long paragraph in one breath, and the room became silent. Jaime also lowered his head, and was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. Of course, he knew that Viserys was not easy to deal with, but this was also the only way. However, Tyrion took a breath, took a sip of wine to moisten his throat, and spoke again. Magic? What? Jaime frowned when he heard this word, not understanding what Tyrion was talking about. I mean that your majesty has mastered magic. The ugly dwarf stared at his brother's eyes closely, and then spoke word by word. He is not a mortal at all. How can you assassinate him? Excuse me, I know Viserys much better than you do. But the deeper I understand, the more scared I feel. Maybe he can hear our conversation now. There is nothing in the whole city that he doesn't know. In the end, Tyrion drank the strong wine in the glass, then put down the glass and shook his head. I can't agree to your request, Jaime. The next morning, the square below the Red Castle was already full of people. The public trial has come to an end. More and more heavyweight nobles have been tried. Today it is the turn of Lord Tywin Lannister, who is said to have shit made of gold. Therefore, many people came to watch the excitement today, as well as the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who were doing their routine work. The King's Landing public trial summoned all the nobles from the Seven Kingdoms to watch the ceremony, and no leave was allowed, unless there were special circumstances. This public trial was originally for the settlement of the usurper war many years ago, and to warn other nobles, so they all had to sit down and listen obediently. Prince Oberyn. At this time, the governor of the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy, walked towards him. My lord governor. The Prince of Dawn, who was wearing a sandy yellow robe and two sun emblems on his shoulders, also nodded politely and greeted him. The two had cooperated in the war to conquer the West, so their relationship was still good. Is the prince in a good mood? After all, today is the day of revenge. Euron was wearing a black suit with his chest exposed, and a pair of broken straw sandals on his feet. He didn't look like a noble of the governor level at all, but rather like a sailor. Then he looked not far away, where the criminals waiting for trial had been escorted out. Duke Tywin Lannister of Casterly Rock and Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, who was brought from the Pentus dungeon. Traitor. Traitor. Demon. As soon as Duke Tywin appeared, he was surrounded by the crowd of King's Landing. Some threw rotten tomatoes, and others threw stones. Tywin was hit on the head, and bleeding before he even stepped onto the stage. The soldiers of the Unsullied Legion had to raise their shields to block their heads to ensure that Tywin was not killed by stones before he reached his destination. The people of King's Landing hated Tywin to the core. Now that this high and mighty duke was in trouble, how could they not add insult to injury? Your Majesty, Your Majesty. At this time, Viserys also came to the stage. Today's two deputy judges, including the unruly Euron, became much more obedient and quickly stood up to salute respectfully. There were also several more chairs on the bench today. The reason was naturally that today's trial was very important, and the eldest Princess Rhaenys also came to the scene. Chapter 598, The Trial of Tywin. Bring the prisoner up. The public trial did not need a tedious opening prayer. After Viserys sat down, all the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms and the two judges on the high platform could sit down. He waved his hand and asked the soldiers to bring Tywin Lannister up directly. Dealing with these people was actually just a formality. Viserys might not hate them that much. This can be seen from his tolerance. Except for the Valerian family, who had betrayed him, he always pursued the principle of killing less and killing carefully in the trial. Of course, the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms who were directly killed on the battlefield were not included. Compared with Oberyn's massacre of the Westerlands, Viserys was simply a merciful lord. If it were Viserys in the original trajectory, he would want to eat Tywin, Eddard Stark, the Kingslayer and others alive, and he would not be satisfied, even if they were cut into pieces. because he actually had no feelings for his nominal father. Then the former Duke of Casterly Rock, whose face was still covered with blood, was pushed up. Tywin was wearing a prison uniform, with his hands tied behind his back, and shackles on his legs. The golden armor and red cape that were once so glorious had long since disappeared. Now there was only an old man who was interrogated in the prison. The wound on his forehead that had just been hit by a stone was simply bandaged. There was still a bright red spot, but it was not too ugly. Then he was pushed up. Tywin Lannister was escorted to the stage, and the people of King's Landing at the scene immediately burst into deafening boos. If it weren't for the golden cloaks surrounding the venue, and in front of His Majesty the King, they would have thrown things up long ago. It can be said that after the disaster in King's Landing more than a decade ago, almost every household had resentment towards the Lannister family. Kneel down. Then the unsullied soldiers pushed Duke Tywin, pressed his shoulders, and pushed him to the ground, and made him kneel down in front of the adults on the stage. Long time no see, Lord Tywin. The silver-haired young man on the stage looked at Lord Tywin, who was pinned to the ground, and greeted him calmly. When Tywin was escorted to King's Landing, Viserys did not go to see him because he felt bored by the sarcasm of the defeated. The last time the two met was probably at the war meeting in the Twins, when the human coalition gathered together to discuss ways to save the world. However, no one expected that humans were such creatures. After repelling the common threat, they fell apart in an instant and started a long civil war that ended only today. Yes, it's been a long time no see, Your Majesty. The last time we met, we fought side by side. Tywin was pressed to his knees on the ground and spoke in a hoarse voice. He raised his head and looked at the newest dignitary of the Seven Kingdoms sitting on the high platform, and then looked around at the familiar and unfamiliar faces around him. The people on the stage are all the winners of this war, and also the vested interests. After a round of power reshuffle, many unfamiliar faces of Tywin are now sitting on the stage. However, karma is hard to escape. More than a decade ago, he was a vested interest sitting on the high platform, paying the smallest price, and reaping the greatest victory in the War of the Usurper. However, today is the time for him to pay his debt. The trial of Tywin naturally starts with the ordinary people of King's Landing. The Minister of Justice selected several representative witnesses with strong eloquence to represent the vast majority of the people of King's Landing to accuse the Lannister family. The first to come up was a fisherman's son, who tearfully recounted the terrible scene that his family had encountered more than a decade ago. The Lannister army opened the gate of King's Landing by deception, and then poured into the city. The royal army found that something was wrong, and wanted to close the gate, but it was too late. The Lannister army began to kill, burn, kill and loot. His father led his family to hide in the cellar, but was discovered by the soldiers of the Lannister army. They killed his father, raped his mother, and threw his 1-year-old brother to death. At that time, the fisherman's son was only 11 years old. He hid in a large vat in a corner of the cellar and survived, but he witnessed this terrible scene with his own eyes. The fisherman's son is already in his 20s and has a family. His wife held the child and listened to his accusations. She also wiped her tears silently and felt sad for her parents-in-law. Justice was absent for more than 10 years, allowing a teenager to grow into a father. The second person to come to the stage was a merchant in King's Landing. His shop was robbed by the Lannister army. A large number of goods were robbed, and the hired clerks were killed. He went bankrupt and paid a large amount of compensation for this. Now he can only work for others and become the director of a business. The third was Sir Alistair Thorne, the head coach of the Night's Watch. He was a knight of the Thorne family in the King's Landing, fought for the Targaryen family in the War of the Usurper, and fought to the last moment in the War of the Fall of King's Landing. After he was captured, Tywin asked him to choose between death or wearing black clothes. He chose to wear black clothes. He witnessed the soldiers of the Lannister army rushing into the Red Keep. Yes, the Lannister soldiers rushed into the Red Keep and killed Princess Elia Martell. They also intended to murder Prince Egon to eliminate the roots, but I sent Prince Egon out through the secret passage in advance. Your Highness is very lucky. If His Majesty hadn't pulled you into the car, I'm afraid. Varys stood in the scorching sun and talked freely, telling the secrets of the year. Finally, he shrugged his shoulders and gave Tywin a look of blessing, and then spoke. So, the Lannister family's intention to wipe out the royal family is exposed. The royal family should now make the Lannister family disappear from history in return. Octopus Spider knows too many secrets and has been a witness several times during this period. Then he finished his words and walked away. After Varys, it was the mountain Gregor Clegane, who was almost tortured crazy by a baron. His 5 limbs were broken, his face was pale and haggard, and his eyes were a little evasive, as if he hadn't seen the sun for a long time, and his eyes looking at a baron were full of fear. On the other side, a burly knight looked at the mountain's current appearance, and was very happy. "You should be like this, my brother." The mountain turned his head, and looked at Sander. His lips trembled slightly, but he didn't say anything. Chapter 599 Beheading. The mountain confessed his crimes in public at the trial. He raped and killed Princess Elia Martel, and grabbed a baby, and threw it against the wall. However, he didn't know whether the baby was Prince Egan, but he just wanted to die quickly. A baron tortured him for several years, and even a man of iron and bronze could not bear it. Later, Gregor Clegane confirmed that, after entering King's Landing, Tywin ordered himself and the Lannister family's knight Amory launched to attack the Red Keep and kill any living Targaryen. And they did it according to Lord Tywin's order, but the means were too cruel. The mountain was captured in the Battle of Pentus many years ago, and another murderer, Amory Lorch, died on the battlefield in the west and was beheaded. The mountain confessed the order of Lord Tywin, and the evidence was irrefutable. The eyes of the Red VIP beside him were full of anger. Even though so many years had passed, and he had destroyed the Lannister family, it was still hard to let it go when he heard it again. Rhaenys' eyes were also slightly red. In fact, she had forgotten the appearance of her father and mother, and their voices, but she had not forgotten their hatred. "Do you have anything else to say, Lord Tywin?" As a participant in this incident, Viserys listened calmly without much ripples. After reviewing it again, he just sighed and spoke. In fact, he had known this result as early as when he came to this world and was about to escape from King's Landing. But at that time he had no way to issue a warning. He had no way to stop the Mad King from opening the city gate, and he could not take away his sister-in-law Princess Elia, or more people. The reason why the Mad King was because his brain was not a normal person. Rhaenys was also chasing the Black Cat, and happened to run in front of the car, and then Viserys was moved by sympathy, gritted his teeth, and pulled him into the car. "You win, you lose, Viserys. I fought, but I lost. I have nothing to say." Tywin raised his head, his voice hoarse and low, without any defense for all his evidence and accusations, and acted very tough. "But there is one thing you must remember." Tywin looked at Viserys with sharp eyes, and then growled, "Lannister, debts must be paid." Tywin, who was pressed to his knees on the ground below, also knew his fate at this moment. Instead of kowtow to Viserys and beg for mercy, hoping to get a chance to wear black clothes, it is better to leave a decent and die calmly. Because Tywin knew that, even if he begged for mercy, he would not get a chance to live, and the beheading platform in the back had already begun preparations. "Prepare for beheading." Bang. 2 soldiers carried a large anvil used by butchers to chop bones, and placed it on the beheading platform, and the royal law enforcer in charge of the beheading was the Westerland warrior Sander Clegane, who was wiping his sword, and then inserting it into the scabbard. The former royal enforcer Rylin Payne had been beheaded by Sander in the trial a few days ago, which was considered karma. Sander was defeated and captured in the Battle of Red Lake, and then surrendered to the Targaryen army. At that time, he was burned black, and a baron only knew his identity later. The Hound killed people very quickly, accurately, and ruthlessly. He was an excellent royal enforcer. He liked to drink before killing people, and then he would be clean and eat, and he would chop off the prisoners' heads completely without adding to their pain. During this period, Sander had chopped off a lot of heads, averaging more than 3 heads a day. However, the one who was to be beheaded at the beginning of today was his brother, Sir Gregor Clegane. The mountain was escorted to the execution ground, like dragging a dead dog. His hands and feet had been broken, so he was naturally unable to fight, and he was pressed down on the beheading platform. Down. On the other side, Sander, wearing heavy scale armor, picked up the wine jug on the table, and drank a few sips, then put it down heavily. Then he drew out a 2-handed sword with a clang, and the bright sword light was quite dazzling under the scorching sun. I wanted to chop you off a long time ago, my big brother. The mountain was pressed on the beheading platform, facing the angry people below. His huge head turned slightly, as if he suddenly had some last moments of light. After all, people can't always face death calmly. Let me go. Let me go. He struggled to get up. He wanted to beg for mercy. After all, he had already identified Tywin, but Sander's sword was merciless. He raised the sword in his hand high, and then suddenly dropped it. With a puff, the mountain's huge head rolled to the ground, and blood splattered on the ground, and sprayed far away. Then Sander wiped the blood off the sword, and put it back into the scabbard. The unsullied soldiers on the other two sides came forward, and dragged away the mountain's body. The mountain was executed, and then it was Tywin Lannister's turn. Go. The unsullied soldier held Tywin's arm expressionlessly, and pushed him to the beheading platform. The blood of killing the mountain had not been wiped clean yet. The chopping board exuded a disgusting stench. It was unknown how many people's blood had been soaked in it. The smell rushed straight into Tywin's nostrils, making his breathing quicken. Even though Tywin had already prepared to die calmly, he was still afraid at the last moment, like the mountain and many other prisoners who were pushed onto the beheading platform. He didn't want to die. However, no one cared about what Tywin was thinking at this moment. Kneel down. He was pressed to the beheading platform by two unsullied soldiers. His chest was on the chopping board, his head was hanging in the air, his neck stretched out, and a feeling of coldness and fear that penetrated deep into his bones enveloped him. The god of death or the stranger seemed to be behind him, just above his head, staring at his fair neck. Tywin's breathing gradually became rapid, the beard on his lips trembled slightly, his chest kept rising and falling, and fear completely enveloped him. He wanted to struggle but couldn't. The arms of the two unsullied soldiers locked his shoulders tightly like a pair of pliers. Gulp gulp. On the other side, the hound, who had just chopped off his brother's head, drank the strong liquor in the wine flask in big gulps. The strong stimulation went through his throat, and went straight to his stomach. Then an ugly face, that had been burned by fire, became a little hideous. Perhaps it was revenge, or he was feeling nostalgic and cursing. Clang. He threw the wine flask to the ground, and then Sander Clegane grasped the hilt with both hands, and pulled out the sword again. The bright sword light was dazzling, and he raised the sword high. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 600 Tears. The Hound, the former law enforcer, raised his sword high in the air. Kill him. Kill him. Kill him. The people of King's Landing below shouted in unison, wanting to see the head of the former Duke of Casterly Rock being chopped off. Hidden in the crowd, standing at the front, James Stone held the long sword at his waist, his body trembling slightly. Even his nails pierced into his palms. He was still unaware, and blood dripped from his fingers to the ground. James watched his father being taken to the beheading platform, and he wanted to draw his sword and rush up to save his father. However, reason told him not to do so, and he chose to listen to his brother's advice. Rushing up like this would not only fail to save his father, but would also put himself at risk. Sorry. On the stage, Tyrion seemed to be unable to bear to watch anymore, and he jumped off his chair, turned around and faced behind him, using the excuse of going to the toilet. Petty, the governor of the valley, who was sitting next to him, held a wine glass, and looked at the back of the little devil, revealing a thoughtful look. In the distant Red Castle, Cersei was wearing a coarse cloth like a maid, and her hand still had traces of washing clothes. In order to survive in the Red Castle, and also for her own children, including her unwilling ambition, Cersei resolutely chose to give up her identity as the queen of the previous dynasty, and decided to start from scratch in the harem of the Red Castle. And the first step for her to start over is to start with the most basic work. There are many places in the Red Castle where maids are needed. She has plenty of milk, and is more suitable for the role of a wet nurse. However, because of her special status, Cersei cannot approach the royal nursery, and cannot take care of the royal family members personally. Therefore, she has now become a laundry maid in the Red Castle. Although her life has fallen to the bottom and she does not look like a girl, she wears a servant's clothes. But Cersei is only 28 years old now, and her beauty still crushes the crowd, and she is even more graceful. At this moment, she stood on a high tower of the Red Keep, looking far away at the execution ground below. She knew that today was the day of trial, but she could not leave the Red Keep to attend her father's trial. She could only stand on the high tower and look far away at the execution ground. Although the distance was far and it was not very clear, she could roughly see her father being escorted to the beheading platform. The executioner drank strong wine, then threw away the wine pot and drew his sword. Facing the scorching sun, he raised his hand and cut off the knife, and Tywin's head rolled to the ground. There was a sudden cheering below, and Cersei, standing on the high tower, had red eyes and tears instantly flowed out. Father. Standing at the front of the crowd, Jaime Stone was surrounded by cheers. People were cheering and celebrating the beheading of Tywin Lannister. Some people even spit on Tywin's head, but he was the only one who clenched his fists, and tears flowed under his disguised ugly cheeks. At the scene of the trial, the soldiers were naturally unable to take care of the emotions of the 3 Lannister siblings because of the noisy voices. An unsullied soldier picked up Tywin's head and then lifted it up with the tip of his gun, while the other 2 soldiers dragged Tywin's body away. The blood left a long trail on the ground and was placed on a flatbed truck and taken away together with the body of the mountain, like a pig being slaughtered in a slaughterhouse. Tywin Lannister, who had given the Targaryen family the heaviest betrayal in the War of the Usurper, was beheaded in public, symbolizing that the ruling class of the 7 Kingdoms had undergone earth-shaking changes. During the Baratheon dynasty, there were 9 regional lords, and only Dorne and the North had not changed. The rest had changed owners. The heads of Tywin and the Mountain were picked up together and hung on the top of the city wall to serve as a warning to others, and also to warn the nobles of the 7 Kingdoms present about the consequences of betraying the royal family. The people cheered enthusiastically, as if it was a celebration feast, while the nobles of the 7 Kingdoms felt a chill on their backs, the cold wind behind their necks, and cold sweat soaked their clothes. For them, this was not a feast, but a naked threat. The world has changed. In a short period of time, more and more ancient families that have been passed down for thousands of years have perished in wars. This is enough to illustrate this problem. Humans have gradually become more ruthless in dealing with their enemies, leaving no room for turning back. They often seize an opportunity to kill them. If you still follow the old ideas and think that you will not be punished for making some mistakes, then you are probably wrong and will pay a bloody price to pay for it. In the prison, Tywin, Eddard Stark and other former criminals were dealt with, some killed and some exiled. The King's Landing dungeon, which was overcrowded half a month ago, only had the last felon left, the former leader of the rebels, King Robert Baratheon of the 7 Kingdoms. On the second day after Tywin was beheaded, Viserys made an exception and allowed Cersei and her 2 children to visit her husband and the father of her 2 children again in advance. "I won't go," said Maya. "Thank you for your kindness." The blonde maid who was washing clothes in the laundry room looked a little unhappy. She stood up and wiped the water stains on her hands on her dirty skirt. She forced a smile and rejected the kindness of Maya, the king's good. After all, she would accuse her husband as a witness tomorrow. She had betrayed Robert a long time ago. Whether physically or mentally, it was no longer necessary to maintain the so-called harmony between husband and wife at the last moment of her life. Cersei refused to visit Robert on the grounds of physical discomfort, but allowed Joffrey to bring his sister Myrcella to the prison to visit their father. The boy with golden hair came to the prison under the guidance of the unsullied soldiers. He saw his father in prison and couldn't help but have red eyes. "Father. Dad." The girl with golden hair and a little baby fat also spoke with tears in her eyes. Joffrey grabbed the prison railing, which was as thick as a baby's arm. There were 2 clear curved marks on it. It seemed that Robert had not given up his desire to survive even in prison. He wanted to rely on his brute force to pry open the railing, but unfortunately, the prison where he was imprisoned was the most top-level defense in the 7 Kingdoms. The unsullied soldiers opened the prison door and let Joffrey and Myrcella in. Robert, who was sitting in a corner of the prison with messy hair and dazed, suddenly woke up. "Joffrey." He stood up, walked over, squatted down, and hugged his 2 children. Even a man of iron couldn't help but shed tears, and then kiss Myrcella with his rough beard. "My daughter." A family drama was being staged in the prison. The father and his 3 children hugged each other and cried bitterly, while the unsullied soldiers outside the prison were expressionless, holding spears in their hands. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.